Chapter 11:11. In front of the door, Lu Yi put the amber back into the spirit beast pouch and flashed to the back of a sacred beetle. He opened its wings and hid his whole body inside. He constructed the concealment and aura-concealing spiritual tattoos in one go. Immediately after, he gave the order in his mind. The enslaved insects connected head to tail and disappeared through the door. The sacred beetle that Lu Yi rode was mixed in with the troops and was inconspicuous. As the light and darkness changed, the feeling of the suppression of the magnetic field disappeared. Lu Yi understood that he had crossed the door and entered the insect race's great secret realm. Lu Yi's ears were full of the sound of insects crawling and flying, as well as the hissing of weapons. He immediately controlled the sacred beetle to fly into the air. After flying to a certain height, he quietly looked down and saw that the door was bustling with insects of all shapes and sizes. The scene was spectacular. In such a situation, if the vanguard camp wanted to stabilize their position, they would have to go through a massacre first. However, once the spiritual power fluctuations appeared, it would inevitably attract more insects. There would be no end to it. He was the vanguard of the vanguard in the war province, using the insects and the explosive fire spirit rock to attract the attention of the insects. However, the other 8 provinces did not have such means. If they wanted to open up a front here, it would be more difficult than the war province. This would depend on the means of the experts of the vanguard camp. Using his mind to sense the position of the insects under his command, he accurately gave different orders to each insect. Those insects went in different directions one by one, going deep into the insect race's great secret realm. In only 2 hours, over 200 spirit sea realm insectoids had been scattered in the range of 20 to 50 miles away from the door. They couldn't be too close, because it would be meaningless if they were too close. They couldn't be too far away, because it wouldn't work if they were too far away. 20 to 50 miles was the best distance. Lu Yi then sent a message to the head teacher. Disciple is in position. The next step was to wait. The 9 provinces' army did not take too long to assemble. After all the people participating in this operation were cultivators above the true lake realm. Moreover, each team had a divine sea realm expert, so the efficiency was naturally not slow. What they had encountered along the way were nothing more than some scattered insectoids that they had encountered at the fork in their path. Once they reached the insectoid path that the vanguard had taken, they would be able to move on without any obstructions. In just 2 days, the armies of the 9 prefectures were in position. The armies of each prefecture were lined up like a long dragon. The dragon head of the army had already met up with the vanguard and was standing in front of one of the portals. However, the dragon tail was perhaps only a few thousand feet into the insect path. It was not that they did not want to go further, but they were limited by the terrain. If the people in front did not charge into the insect race's secret realm, the people behind would not be able to push forward. While lying dormant, Lu Yi received a message from the sect leader. It was time to make a move. He immediately gave orders to the 200 insectoids under his command. Among the insectoids, a mantis insectoid of the divine sea realm suddenly waved his own mantis blade and attacked his companions beside him. Under the sharp and swift slash, many insectoids were cut into pieces on the spot before they could even react. However, there were some stronger insectoids who were still alive even though they were slashed. Driven by their instincts, they started to fight back against the mantis insectoids. As early as the last time he came to the insect race's secret realm, Lu Yi discovered something. The insectoids here did not live in harmony. Instead, they fought frequently. The stronger insectoids treated the weaker insectoids as food and resources. When the weaker insectoids were attacked, they would instinctively fight back. On the other hand, in the 9 prefectures, there was basically no killing between insectoids. Perhaps there was something more attractive outside. On the other side, a dog insectoid also started to bite its companion beside it. After a short killing, the scene became intense. At the same time, a centipede-like insectoid with a body length of more than 10 feet wrapped around a companion. Its mouth wriggled and bit off the companion's carapace, revealing the flesh and blood inside. Chaos came inadvertently, and it was not just in one place. In the end, the fight between insectoids inevitably came into contact with the explosive fire spirit rock on their backs. A roar suddenly sounded, accompanied by violent and chaotic fluctuations of spiritual energy. In order to create enough spiritual power fluctuations to attract the insectoids, each of the Divine Sea Realm insectoids, under Lu Ye's command, carried at least 100 explosive fire spirit rocks. The bigger the insectoid, the more explosive fire spirit rocks they carried. For example, the centipede-like insectoid carried thousands of explosive fire spirit rocks on its back. As long as the power of one explosive fire spirit rock was activated, the rest of the explosive fire spirit rocks would explode in a short time. When the flames rose into the sky, it was like a handful of salt was sprinkled into a pot of oil. The insectoids within a 100-mile radius immediately became restless. Almost all the insectoids who sensed the spiritual power fluctuations became excited at this moment. Driven by their instincts, they gathered toward the source of the spiritual power fluctuations. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of explosions kept coming out. Pillars of flame soared into the sky, the location where the more than 200 Divine Sea Realm insectoids were at became the focus of the insectoid army. Not only were the insectoids on the ground attracted, but the insectoids flying in the sky were also attracted. Originally, there were still some insectoids flying around Lu Yi. However, at this moment they all became solemn. When he looked up, there was no one around him except for the sacred beetle he was riding. Even the sacred beetle he planted with the soul manipulation spirit soul seemed to be attracted by the spiritual power fluctuations. If he had not ordered it to suppress it, it would have carried him to the nearest source of the spiritual power fluctuations. If that was the case, then it would be fun. When he looked down, the originally bustling door was now empty. There was not a single insectoid to be seen. The plan was executed much more smoothly than expected. The sound of explosions continued. More than 200 Divine Sea Realm insectoids, scattered in different locations, could not all move at the same time. After all, there was a sequence, which could buy him more time. The space inside the door fluctuated slightly. Several figures rushed out of the door almost at the same time. The leaders were still Pang Zhen and Longbo. Because they did not know what was going on here, they were all prepared to take action. However, when they rushed in, there was not a single insectoid around. The closest insectoid to them was a few miles away, and it was still moving away quickly. This sudden scene stunned them. However, they immediately understood that it was Lu Ye's work. Pang Zhen could not help but shout, "Well done!" Although Lu Ye's eucalyptus extraction had been approved during the Great Council, no one knew whether or not it would be of any use, and to what extent. Only now did they know that Lu Ye's eucalyptus extraction was more effective than they had imagined. Disregarding everything else, now that there was not a single insectoid in front of the door, the Vanguard Battalion could do whatever they wanted. More figures passed through the door and entered the insectoid's great secret realm. In just a few breaths of time, the Vanguard Battalion's hundreds of experts had all passed through. Act according to the plan, Longbow ordered. The hundreds of people immediately spread out and slowly advanced outwards in a fan shape. The fluctuation of the space inside the door did not stop. After the Vanguard Battalion, the cultivators in charge of building the defensive line were the first to arrive at the insectoid's great secret realm. The cultivators who came were of different cultivation levels. Some were in the Spirit Sea realm, while others were in the True Lake realm. They were array cultivators, and their mission was to set up all kinds of large arrays in front of the door. In such a situation, the faster they set up enough arrays, the easier it would be to reduce the pressure on the people of the Vanguard Battalion. This was undoubtedly a test of their attainments in array Dao. Once the array cultivators set up the arrays, the spiritual energy fluctuations became chaotic. Some insectoids had already sensed the spiritual energy fluctuations here. They changed their direction and rushed over. It could be foreseen that as time passed, more and more insectoids would arrive. Eventually, it would become a situation where an enormous insectoid tide would attack the human camp. Lu Yi rode his sacred beetle and descended from the sky. He joined the Vanguard Battalion's formation, with the sect master on the left and the missing moon immortal on the right, there was a sense of security. He took out Hupa from his spirit beast pouch and placed it on his shoulder. He also flashed out and came to the sect master's side. Master. Looking at Yi and feeling the spiritual energy fluctuations on her body, the sect master nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. After not seeing her for a long time, Yi's growth was undoubtedly great. This made the sect master very satisfied. Stay by my side and watch me kill in all directions. The sect master was full of lofty sentiments. Yi clapped her hands. Disciple will support master. On the other side, the missing moon immortal also transmitted a message to Lu Yi. Don't go too far away from me. Lu Yi laughed. Senior martial sister, I'm not a child. I'm a weapon cultivator. As a weapon cultivator, he naturally had to fight with his blade. How could he always be protected by others? The corner of the missing moon immortal's mouth curled up. She did not say anything more. Although the vanguard battalion's speed was not fast, it was not slow either. Soon, they had advanced to a position 5 miles away from the door. This was considered an encirclement. The encirclement behind them was the army's position. Before the defensive line was completely built, they had to rely on the masters of the vanguard battalion to resist the attacks of the insect race, and buy enough time for the army to build the defensive line. Hundreds of people were scattered at the edge of a 5-mile semicircle, and the distance between each other was not close. This required a high level of personal ability. This was also the reason why the vanguard battalion only selected cultivators above the 7th order. If one's cultivation was lower, it would be difficult for them to take on big responsibilities. Once the insect race broke through the defensive line, it was very likely that it would cause an impact to the rear. The encirclement of the army's territory was extremely smooth. They did not encounter any obstacles. This was all thanks to Lu Yi. The explosion of more than 200 scattered spirit sea realm insects, with exploding fire spirit stones, attracted the attention of too many insect race clans, giving the army enough time to prepare. However, the other 8 continents did not have this ability. If they wanted to encircle the territory, they could only kill all the insect race clans in front of them. It could be said that in front of the other 8 portals, the war had already begun when the vanguard battalion rushed into the insect race's great mystic realm. The vanguard battalion needed to push forward while killing until they had advanced enough distance to stabilize their position and make enough space for the army to arrive. Chapter 11-12. Stop. Pang Zhen's voice was transmitted through the activation of spiritual energy. When he gave the order, everyone stopped moving forward. Lu Yi looked ahead. All kinds of insects were rushing forward like a tide, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Even if he was mentally prepared, his expression could not help but become serious. The distance between each other was getting closer and closer, and the spiritual energy of the vanguard camp powerhouses began to fluctuate. In the middle of the fan-shaped area, Pang Zhen was holding a spiritual talisman overflowing with spiritual energy. He threw it forward, and in an instant muffled thunder rumbled. The sky changed color, and thunderclouds gathered and rotated. Kill! At the same time, a thunderous roar came out of his mouth. Thick bolts of lightning struck down from the thunderclouds, smashing into the swarm of insects like heavenly punishment. Amidst the wanton lightning, a large number of insects were annihilated. This seemed to be a signal. When the lightning struck, the powerhouses of the vanguard camp also used various methods to attack the swarm of insects. In an instant, different colors and powerful techniques were formed. There were also blade and sword chi crisscrossing. There were also countless rays of light from imperial equipment shuttling back and forth in the formation, bringing about puffs of hot blood. The screams of the insects were endless, and they fell in droves. Fresh blood soaked the ground in an instant. On Lu Ye's left, the sect leader and Yi used their techniques together. But it was mainly the sect leader who killed randomly, and Yi who was responsible for the attacks. The difference in cultivation was too great, and Yi's attacks could only be used as icing on the cake. On Lu Ye's right was the thinking moon immortal, whose sword chi covered the sky and earth, wantonly shuttling back and forth, sharp and threatening. However, whether it was the sect leader or the thinking moon immortal, in the choice of attack range, They took into consideration the area facing Lu Yi. They probably felt that he, a weapon cultivator, would not be able to perform well in such a situation. The Fire Phoenix technique and the Fire Dragon technique were connected head to tail, and Lu Yi was relieved. The attacks of the insects not only came from the ground, but also from the sky. Many insects were born with the ability to fly, and even if they did not have wings, once their cultivation reached a certain level, they could fly. However, under the counterattack of the many powerhouses of the vanguard camp, whether it was on the ground or in the air, all the insects were unable to come within 3 miles. Looking down from the sky, the 3 li of land in front of the vanguard battalion had shockingly turned into a land of death that no living creature could approach. Every insect that crossed the line of death fell to the ground. The insect corpses on the ground quickly piled up, and the insect blood converged into a river. This was destined to be a battle between you and me. In the face of these insects that had brought disaster to 9 regions for several years, the experts of the vanguard camp did not show any mercy. The pressure wasn't great. If the insect tide's attack was only at this level, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the insect plague. However, everyone knew that this was just the beginning. The real pressure had yet to come. Not to mention the fact that there were not many large bugs among the invading insectoids. Even the giant bugs that had appeared in the video were nowhere to be seen. Moreover, as time passed, the spiritual energy of the cultivators would be depleted. Even the experts of the vanguard battalion could not maintain such an offensive for a long time. The violent and chaotic spiritual energy fluctuations attracted more and more insects, and the scale of the insect tide was constantly expanding. Even if the insects were constantly being killed, there were still more insects coming in to replace them. At this time, everyone was only glad that the insects didn't have much intelligence. Otherwise, if such a scale of insect tide appeared in 9 regions, the situation of 9 regions would probably collapse. At that time, it would inevitably be a disaster, and the people would be plunged into misery and suffering. Lu Yi only focused on the area he was defending. He alternated between using the Fire Phoenix technique and the Fire Dragon technique. He could also cast other techniques, but in the current situation, these 2 techniques were undoubtedly the most lethal and the most effective to form an area of effect attack. Since he had shown his ability, the sect leader and Thought Moon Immortal could deal with the area they were defending with peace of mind. They didn't have to be distracted to reduce the pressure on him. Behind him came the sound of skimming through the air. Then one figure after another stood beside him. Without any communication, the new cultivators immediately joined the counterattack sequence. After the formation cultivators took the lead to pass through the portal, the reinforcements of the 9 regions army arrived. Most of them were magic cultivators, because in such a counterattack, magic cultivators could fully display their abilities. There were also some body cultivators and weapon cultivators, who were mainly responsible for dealing with the insects that rushed to the front. At the same time, they used the Twin Chi Link Branches Array Disc to facilitate the magic cultivators. Each team was assigned in advance, so although there were a lot of people pouring in at this time, it seemed messy but not chaotic. There was originally a little distance between Lu Yi Shi, the sect leader, and Thought Moon Immortal, but with the reinforcements of the 9 regions army, there was a gap in the middle. The area was quickly filled by the new cultivators. The reinforcements were endless until the latecomers could no longer find a place to stay. With the support of these people, the second stage of the vanguard, the most dangerous initial stage, passed. Enter. Pang Zhen gave another order. When the order was given, everyone stepped forward in an orderly manner. Looking down from the sky, the semicircle of 5 miles was advancing outward at a moderate speed, expanding the scope of the position behind them and lengthening their own battle line. Only in this way could they better display the strength of the cultivator army and kill the insects more effectively. Otherwise, if they were limited to this 5-mile semicircle, many people would not be able to find a place to attack and would waste their own forces. Moreover, for the entire army of cultivators in the war province, a 5-mile radius was still too small. The counterattack line was advancing outward, but the 3-mile radius was still the death line of the insects. Most of the insects could not cross this 3-mile limit. Occasionally, a few big insects would be lucky enough to rush in, but they would be quickly killed by the concentrated fire of the cultivators. As the battle line lengthened, the distance between Lu Yi, the sect leader, and Thought Moon Immortal also increased. This meant that it was difficult for him to get reinforcements from the left and right. If any powerful insects appeared in the area he was in charge of defending, he would have to find a way to deal with them himself. He spread out his divine sense and sensed a little. He found that he had 1/8 order divine sea cultivator. For 7th order cultivators, more than 27th order divine sea cultivators, and the rest were all true lake cultivators. Such a force was not weak, and it was more than enough to deal with ordinary situations. In the beginning, the advance was smooth because even though the battle line was lengthened, more cultivators joined the counterattack. Therefore, in terms of attack intensity, the war province's side did not decrease, but instead increased. Naturally, there was no pressure. However, as time passed, everyone gradually felt a certain amount of pressure. On one hand, the scale of the insect tide had increased, and on the other hand, the battle line had been lengthened. Fortunately, at this moment, Pang Zhen's voice sounded again. Stop. He was obviously in charge of the overall situation, and gave the appropriate order at the right time. Otherwise, if they continued to advance endlessly, their battle line would definitely be broken first. At this point they felt some pressure, but the pressure was not too great, and was still within the range that they could bear. At this moment, the front line had been extended to a distance of more than 10 miles from the door. The main force of the cultivators was still the cultivators. After all, in such a defensive counterattack, the cultivators could play a greater role than the other sections. This was the advantage of having more manpower. The main task of the cultivators, the body cultivators, and even the ghost cultivators now was to borrow power from the twin chi connection array disk for the cultivators. In case the Zergs got close, they had to be responsible for protecting the cultivators. However, since the battle began, no Zergs had been able to break through the defensive line of the spell. This caused the cultivators of the other sects to have nothing to do. The cultivators who had imperial artifacts could still activate them to relieve their boredom, and pick up the scraps among the dazzling spells. The cultivators who did not have imperial artifacts were really bored. After all, imperial artifacts were used by cultivators to make up for their lack of offensive means, when their strength was not high. When their cultivation was higher, imperial artifacts would become useless. Lu Yi, for example, rarely used the power of imperial equipment in battle. If he did use imperial equipment, his saber light might be even more powerful than imperial equipment. Brothers, let some Zergs come over. It's not easy for us to come here, so we can't just look at them. That's right. Brothers and sisters, we can't eat alone. Even if we don't share the rain and dew, at least let us exercise our hands and feet. Luia, you're a weapon cultivator. How can you use such a good spell? Is there any justice in this world? The group of people was noisy, and the solemn atmosphere of the battle was ruined. The main reason was that there was no 9th Order Master on Lu Ye's side, so everyone was not so restrained. If it were other places with 9th Order cultivators, they would not be so free to do as they pleased. The cultivators followed the advice, and deliberately let some Zergs come over under the vast and dense offensive. They thought that it would relieve the boredom of the weapon cultivators, the body cultivators, and the ghost cultivators. But who knew that the quarrel would become even more fierce? Hey, that sword cultivator from Xiaoguo's sect. Looking at you, you're obviously not a good person. Sword cultivator, just use your flying sword to attack from afar. Why are you stealing our Zergs? Fellow Taoist, don't use your saber light. You killed the Zergs from 1,000 feet away. What's the difference between this method and a weapon cultivators? We weapon cultivators should fight in close quarters to show the power of weapon cultivators. Isn't the one who used the spirit talisman a bit shameless? Who doesn't have a spirit talisman in their hands? The quarrel was a mess, but in the end, no Zergs could get close to 1,000 feet. The weapon cultivators, the body cultivators, and the ghost cultivators criticized each other. Although they despised the actions of others, they did not hesitate to attack. It was a classic double standard. Saber light, fist shadows, imperial artifacts, spirit talismans, and various other methods. Be careful, there's a big guy coming. Suddenly a cry of alarm sounded. Everyone also saw the incoming Zergs. Big did not refer to the size, but to the strength. The aura of the Zergs was on the level of a ninth order divine sea. Chapter 11:13. It was an insect that looked like a pangolin. It was hidden in the huge insect swarm, and rushed over with the swarm. Before it appeared, no one had noticed its existence. It was only when it suddenly appeared and revealed its powerful aura that it was imprinted in the eyes of many cultivators. All of a sudden, spells of all colors were unleashed from all directions. Violent rumbling sounds were accompanied by extremely chaotic fluctuations of spirit energy. It was as if a huge firework had ignited in the sky. It was a spectacular sight. "It's not dead!" someone shouted. Under the perception of their divine senses, the pangolin insect did not show any signs of weakening after suffering so many spell techniques. This was simply inconceivable. After all, there were more than 10 spirit sea realm cultivators attacking together. Even if the pangolin was a ninth order human, it should not be unharmed. However, this pangolin insect did it. More spell techniques were launched in that direction. In the chaos, a shadow rushed out from the vortex of spell techniques. It was the pangolin insect. At this moment, it had curled up its entire body and was spinning rapidly like a top, rushing over at an extremely fast speed. Because it was not big, its movements were extremely agile. As it spun, it was able to dodge most of the spell techniques. The occasional spell techniques that landed on its body could not stop it at all. What was even more surprising was that after this pangolin insectoid appeared, even more pangolin insectoids appeared. All of them rolled themselves up and spun around as they approached. The cultivators soon discovered the problem. These insects were spinning at an extremely fast speed, so they had a rebound effect on spell techniques, and could greatly weaken the power of spell techniques. Moreover, these insects should have a strong resistance to spell techniques. This was due to the thick bone carapace on their backs. The sudden appearance of a group of pangolin insects finally allowed the insect swarm to break through the 3-kilometer death line. Because the cultivators had wasted too much energy on them, more insects followed behind these pangolin insects and quickly advanced forward. The cultivators realized that something was wrong and immediately changed their strategy. They ignored the pangolin insects and continued to pour spell techniques into the insect swarm. In such a large-scale battle, a spell cultivator's advantage was that they could quickly kill enemies from a long distance and prevent the spread of the insect swarm. In such a situation, it was extremely unwise to waste energy on an opponent that they couldn't defeat in a short time. The only thing they should do now was to kill the other insectoids more effectively. The distance was quickly shortened. When the group of pangolin insects was only 300 meters away from the front line, the body cultivators, weapon cultivators, and ghost cultivators, who had long been impatient, welcomed them joyfully. Lu Yi was among them. He and the other body cultivator immediately set their sights on the ninth order insect race leader. The physique cultivator's body swelled up in an instant. His chi and blood were so exuberant that he looked like a burning fireball. Lu Yi even brought out the dragon throne and draped it over his body. His scarlet figure, which was dozens of feet tall, attracted many surprised gazes. He brought out the dragon spine saber, and in an instant, a ferocious aura erupted. It was even more ferocious than the insectoids. At a time like this, there was no doubt that they had to end the battle quickly. Otherwise, if the battle dragged on for too long, it would be disadvantageous to their own side. Especially since his opponent was a ninth-order big insect, Lu Yi naturally didn't dare to hold back. The body cultivator took the lead, and, with a distance of more than 10 meters between them, punched out with both his fists. His vitality and spirit energy surged, and a sky full of fist shadows flew out and struck the insect. Amidst the rumbling sounds, dumb insect's speed was slightly hindered. Even its rotation speed slowed down a little. The burly body cultivator's body moved forward and opened his arms. Looking at his posture, it seemed like he was going to hug dumb insect. A mysterious power surged around his body. It couldn't be said that he was acting recklessly, but it was clearly a kind of secret technique, and also the fighting style of this body cultivator. One man and one insect collided. The body cultivator's hands slammed together, and with the force of this embrace, even the void in front of him seemed to be squeezed and began to distort. The insect immediately let out a hiss, and its rapidly rotating body stagnated for a moment. Even if its aura was comparable to a ninth-order divine sea realm cultivator's secret technique, it was still somewhat unable to bear it, and the white bone carapace on its back immediately began to crack. If the body cultivator could maintain this secret technique for a long time, it would only take a few breaths for him to crush this insect. However, in the end this was a ninth-order insect, so how could it be so easy to kill? As the insect hissed, the body cultivator's figure was sent flying like a paper kite, his arms and even palms covered in blood. After the insect broke free, a fierce light flashed across its eyes, and just as it was about to chase after the body cultivator, a long saber slashed down from the sky, and a violent aura swept out, slamming into its back. The already cracked carapace was immediately dented. Under the huge impact, the insect's figure fell down. Lu Yi donned the dragon throne and followed closely behind, waving his dragon spine saber, which transformed into a sky full of saber images that enveloped the insect. Wearing the dragon throne, Lu Yi was undoubtedly in his strongest state, but there was a drawback that could not be ignored. Not only did it consume too much energy, but it was also a problem with its size. The dragon throne was more suitable for large-scale slaughter, not one-on-one battles like this, especially when the opponent was a small insect. Therefore, although Lu Ye's saber was fierce, it was difficult for him to cause fatal damage to the insect in a short time. Of course, if there was enough time, he could still kill this insect. However, what they lacked now is time, because with the impact of these pangolin insects, a large number of body cultivators, armament cultivators, and ghost cultivators attacked. The defensive line occupied by the body cultivator was already feeling the pressure. The most direct manifestation of this was that the insect tide was already 2 kilometers away, and it was still rapidly approaching. At the critical moment, the body cultivator arrived again. He was also a battle veteran, and when he rushed over, he saw the awkward situation Lu Yi was in. Making a prompt decision, he slammed into the saber images that filled the sky and suddenly appeared behind the insect. He opened his arms again, and a mysterious power surged out. His blood, chi, and spiritual force surged as he hugged the big insect. No matter how the big insect struggled, he didn't let go. At the same time he angrily shouted, "Lu Yi!" Lu Yi had already retracted his saber when the body cultivator slammed into the saber images and assumed a stabbing posture. Almost at the same time as the body cultivator shouted, the dragon spine saber had already stabbed out. The body cultivator's pupils instantly shrank to the size of a needle tip, because the violent and ferocious aura that accompanied the saber made even him, an 8th-order cultivator, a little scared. Especially when this saber was coming in his direction, he could not help but feel a great sense of panic. Is Lu Yi going to attack both the insect and the insect? Fortunately, he also knew that Lu Yi would not have any harmful thoughts towards him at this time, so he forced himself to calm down and remain motionless. The dragon spine saber pierced into the insect's heart, and the sharp tip of the saber pierced through the insect's carapace. The body cultivator immediately felt a cold touch on his chest. The dragon spine saber flicked upwards and directly cut open the insect's stomach. Blood and internal organs spilled out, and the insect's vitality quickly dissipated. The body cultivator hurriedly dodged to the side with a frightened expression. Lu Yi had already rushed to the side to help the others deal with the insects that had rushed to the front. Everyone was fighting a bloody battle, whether it was the body cultivator, armament cultivator, ghost cultivator, or dharma cultivator. The overwhelming light of spirit techniques had not stopped since the beginning. With the help of Lu Ye's method of controlling the insects, the war province had a perfect start. This was an advantage that the other 8 provinces did not have. With such a perfect start, it would be unjustifiable if the front line collapsed at this moment. After the initial calm, The war province's front line was now feeling the pressure. Not only was the area where Lu Yi was under pressure, but the other front lines were also under pressure. The insect tide was like a wave, pushing forward wave after wave. The only thing the cultivators could do was to keep killing, and not let the insect tide gather enough to break through the front line. After separating from the body cultivator, Lu Yi brazenly killed his way into the swarm. With the might of the Dragon Emperor and the sharpness of the dragon spine saber, he really killed everyone. At first, there were other human cultivators nearby who cooperated with him, but gradually, they could only fight on their own. Perhaps it was because the Dragon Emperor's aura was too fierce that it attracted the attention of the insect tribe. Lu Yi was constantly surrounded by insects that were difficult to calculate. Even though his killing speed was not slow, he could not keep up with the efficiency of the insect tide's replenishment. Finally, at a certain moment, the scarlet figure that was tens of meters tall was drowned by the insect tribe. The insect tribe seemed to have realized that this was an excellent opportunity, so more of them gathered from all directions. In an instant, the place where Lu Yi was had turned into a mountain of insects, and the scarlet light of the Dragon Emperor could no longer be seen. When the cultivators of the war province not far away saw this, they wanted to come and help. However, at this moment, none of them could get away, so how could they help? Just as everyone thought that Lu Yi was probably going to die, violent spiritual power fluctuations suddenly surged out from the depths of the mountain of insects. Then, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed as if a big sun had suddenly bloomed. The mountain of insects collapsed, and a large number of insects were killed at this moment. Broken limbs and pieces of flesh flew out. Where the scarlet figure stood, a huge lotus flower slowly bloomed. The dazzling light was formed by the convergence of countless saber lights. The lotus flower covered an area with a radius of tens of meters. Not to mention the insects, even a layer of the ground was cut off, and the ground was full of crisscrossing gullies. The third form of the tyrant saber, Lotus Sun, after taking back the inheritance of the tyrant saber art from his third senior brother in Red River City, Lu Yi had already understood the third form of the tyrant saber. Just as he had guessed before, the third form had the word sun in its name. This was a sign. The first form was stars, the second form was crescent moon, and the third form was Lotus Sunday. After taking back the inheritance of the tyrant saber art from his third senior brother in Red River City, Lu Yi had already understood the third form of the tyrant saber. Just as he had guessed before, the third form had the word sun in its name. This was a sign. The first form was stars, the second form was crescent moon, and the third form was Lotus Sunday. This was also the last form of the tyrant saber art. It was much more powerful than the first two forms. Of course, it also consumed a lot of energy. It was just right to use it in such an environment. Chapter 11:14. Just as the battle was getting intense, a huge beam of light swept out from behind the front line. Wherever the beam of light passed, a vacuum passage that was more than 10 miles long was cleared out. All the insects in the passage were turned into ashes. It took a full 3 to 4 breaths for the passage to be filled with new insects. More beams of light swept out from behind, accompanied by huge buzzing sounds and extremely violent spiritual power fluctuations. It was the formation behind the front line that was exerting its power. After the hundreds of experts from the vanguard camp, the first to cross the door was a large number of formation cultivators. They only had one task, which was to set up formations as soon as possible. It was not a defensive formation, but a killing formation. This was the insect clan's secret realm. The goal of the human clan was to eliminate the insect clan. So what was the use of a defensive formation? Only a killing formation was the way to go. Offense was the best defense. This time, the military province had also invested a lot. Powerful spiritual treasures were brought in by the major sects, including the most powerful treasures of some top sects. It should be noted that these treasures would not be used easily under normal circumstances, such as the Annihilation Thunder Spear of the Sky Yuan sect. These top-rate spirit treasures were placed within numerous formations, and they served as the cores of the formations. They were boosted by the energy of the formations, so how terrifying was the might they could display. It could be said that such power was not something that a cultivator could perform. Naturally, it would be extremely harmful to the insect clan. The buzzing sounds continued, and the formations were overloaded. With the activation of the spiritual treasures and formations, the insect tide's attack was finally suppressed. In just the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the insect tide was suppressed back to 1.5 miles. The body cultivators, weapon cultivators, and ghost cultivators, who had come out of the formation, returned to the front line and sat cross-legged to recover. In the area where Lu Yi was, many people were injured, not to mention the others. Just the body cultivator, who had joined forces with him to kill the giant insect, looked a little miserable. His hands and arms were bloody like lakes. However, for body cultivators, such injuries were not a big deal. Because their physiques were strong and their qi and blood were vigorous, they recovered quickly. Those who were seriously injured had retreated near the door. Medical cultivators were waiting there, ready to treat the seriously injured at any time. After this battle, the frustrations of the body cultivators, weapon cultivators, and ghost cultivators were finally resolved. Moreover, Lu Yi keenly felt that there were some subtle changes in the way these people looked at him. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect was famous. In his early years, he was known as the sect exterminating Yi and the three disasters of the spirit stream. Now he was one of the two heroes of the military province. However, for some veteran cultivators of the Divine Sea realm, Lu Yi was still a rising star due to his age. The so-called rising star cultivators might have a bright future, but not now. However, in the battle just now, everyone had witnessed his ability with their own eyes. Even though he had borrowed external strength, it was still a kind of strength that he possessed. It could be said that the strength displayed by Lu Yi was not at all inferior to those veteran Divine Sea realm experts, and was even stronger than most of them. If one had not seen it with their own eyes, it would have been hard to believe that this was the work of a young man in his early 20s. In the end, cultivators were judged by their strength. The level of strength Lu Yi displayed would determine the level of treatment he would receive. Many Divine Sea realm cultivators realized that this young man not only had a bright future, but also a bright future. No one treated him as a junior anymore. On the vast stage of the 9 prefectures, there was already a place for him. Rest, reorganize, and fight again. The cultivators also began to take turns to fight. No one knew how long this battle would last, so they had to use their strength more effectively to kill the enemy. Human strength was limited. No cultivator could maintain a high-intensity spirit art. They also needed to recover. The spirit artifacts placed in the array cores could always release powerful power at the most critical moment. They were a safeguard to maintain the stability of the military province's front line and couldn't be used casually. Pang Zhen, Long Bo, the sect master Mu Suifeng, and Su Xiao, 5 Ninth Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators, withdrew from the front line and formed a mobile team. Among them, Pang Zhen was the Deputy Union Master of the Grand Heaven Alliance in the military province. Long Bo was the City Lord of Myriad Demon City. Mu Suifeng was the Sword Master of the North Profound Sword Sect, and Su Xiao was the Palace Master of Blue Cloud Palace. These people were the best in the military province, in terms of strength and status. It was easy to imagine how important the team formed by them was. Their tasks were, firstly, to coordinate the overall situation and secondly, to provide reinforcements everywhere to ensure that the defense line was not broken. With the support of such 5 experts, as long as the Force province fought steadily and did not panic, there would not be any major problems. At this moment, the 5 of them were standing in the air, overlooking the entire battlefield and communicating with their divine senses. The situation on our side is basically fine. What about the other continents? Have you asked them? Longbo looked at Pang Zhen. Pang Zhen said, "We have gained a firm foothold, but in the beginning, almost every continent suffered casualties of varying degrees. This was inevitable. The military province had Lu Ye's means to attract the attention of the insects, and buy enough time for the vanguard battalion. But the other continents didn't have such means. Basically, after the vanguard battalion took the lead to kill their way in, a large number of cultivators followed closely behind. While the battle was going on, they continued to push outward and establish a defensive line. During this period, some casualties were inevitable. From this point of view, Luya's contribution was not small. How can there be no deaths in a war? Those who die can only blame themselves for not cultivating enough. Longbow said casually. However, if the situation continues to progress like this, the price to pay to solve the problem here won't be too high. Won't things be going too smoothly? Pang Zhen said. The thing that hindered our operation before was only how to solve the problem of the primordial magnetic field suppressing our strength. Now that this problem has been solved, the rest is naturally not troublesome. The insects have limited intelligence after all. They have numbers, but they only follow their instincts. What's the point of killing some insects? If the insects continue to behave like this, we'll kill them all sooner or later. Mu Suifeng said. Don't forget that there are still some giant insects. In the images provided by Lu Yi, there were some extremely large insects. No one knew how strong those insects could be. After all, no one had encountered them before. Moreover, until now, these giant insects had not shown any signs of moving. They could only vaguely see their huge figures at the end of their vision. Su Xiu was eager to give it a try. Do you want to try out those giant insects' methods? The men also glanced at her. Although this woman had a delicate appearance and looked like a pretty girl from a humble family, she was actually an individual cultivator. Her small body contained unimaginably terrifying power. When they were young, they had more or less interacted with her. Naturally, they all knew the madness hidden under her delicate and gentle appearance. She had probably wanted to provoke those giant insects for a long time, but it was not good for her to rashly go in alone. Thus, she wanted to encourage the others to join her. No need. Longbow hurriedly refused. This old man still wants to live for a few more years. Su Xiu curled her lips. Coward. The veins on Longbow's forehead throbbed. The sect master spoke at the right time. Compared to this war itself, I'm actually more concerned about another matter. Everyone's gazes converged. There are no resources in this insect race's great secret realm. How can it breed such a large number of insects? How did these insects come to be? This was actually a question that everyone was puzzled about. They all had some thoughts, but it was not good to say them out loud because there was no concrete evidence. The 9 Great Gates correspond to the 9 great continents. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Moreover, the insect plague erupted too suddenly. There were no signs at all. It's like a pair of invisible hands are pushing this matter to happen. In truth, the sect master and Lu Yi had discussed this coincidence before, but they did not delve too deeply into it. It was not just him and Lu Yi who had some suspicions. Which divine sea realm cultivator in the 9 continents who had some knowledge did not have suspicions? However, some things were not easy to say. If that's the case, then what's the goal? Longbow asked. The sect master sighed. If this old man knew, I wouldn't have so many doubts. However, based on the current situation, the insect plague has brought about a result. Pang Zhen's eyes flashed. For the first time in several thousand years, the 2 factions have joined forces on a large scale. What does this mean? Longbow frowned. They want to use this war to ease the tension between the 2 factions? Who knows? The sect master replied leisurely and meaningfully. In the end, we cultivators have to follow the will of the heavens in our cultivation. If there really is a hidden hand behind this war, perhaps it won't be long before we find out the deeper meaning behind it. Right now the time is not yet right. Several people fell into deep thought. They had a faint feeling that after this insect plague that had swept through the 9 continents was resolved, perhaps something extremely shocking would happen. At the front of the front line, many magic cultivators were still executing spells to kill the attacking insect race. Lu Yi lay on the ground with his arms and legs spread out, chewing on spirit pills to recover his spiritual energy and physical strength. Hupo lay beside him, his tongue sticking out. As the war progressed, the frequency of the need for body cultivators, weapon cultivators, and ghost cultivators to move out increased. There was no longer the time when they had nothing to do, so the cultivators of these factions had to seize the time to recover their strength. It was late at night, and the sky was filled with stars. Lu Yi discovered that the starry sky in the insect race's great secret realm was not much different from what he observed in the 9 continents. After all, the insect race's great secret realm was still under the influence of the 9 continents' heavenly secrets. Then he discovered something that surprised him. In a certain part of the starry sky, a star seemed to have become a little brighter than before. This was the 3rd time he had observed this part of the starry sky. It was not intentional, just a casual glance. The first time he observed it, he did not pay too much attention to it. The second time, he discovered the change in the star's brightness, and this time, the change was even more obvious. He did not know the source of this change. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 11:15. Although the war was fierce, the direction of the war was advantageous to the human side. As long as the insect tide could not break through the front line of the 9 continents, they could only continue to die. According to the current development of the situation, sooner or later, the human race would be able to exterminate the insect race. No matter how many insects there was a limit. There would always be a time when they would all be killed. As time passed, the insect tide's offensive became weaker and weaker, and their numbers became fewer and fewer. Until 10 days after the war began, the insect race could no longer form a large-scale offensive. Thus, the human side realized that the time to counterattack had come. From this moment on, the war would enter the 3rd stage. The cultivator army of the 9 continents would advance from 9 directions, sweeping away the insect race along the way and destroying the insect nests that stood on the ground. They would solve the problem of the insect plague from the root. This was the plan, but it was not simple to actually carry it out. First of all, a certain amount of strength must be left in front of the door to prevent the insect race from escaping through the door. At present, almost 80% of the elite forces of the 9 continents were concentrated in the insect race's great secret realm. Although there were some divine sea realm cultivators left in the 9 continents, there were not many of them. They were only used for emergency purposes. For example, Li Taibai's doppelganger did not follow the army into the insect race's great secret realm this time. This was because the myriad demon Ridge valued him very much and did not want him to take unnecessary risks. He was ordered to stay in the Dark Moon Forest Pass and be responsible for dealing with some fish that might escape the net. However, because there were formations set up by the army of each continent in front of the door, there was not a need for too many people to stay behind. If the insect race really came, the formation could resist them. Moreover, it was impossible for the 9 cultivator armies to advance in a straight line. If that was the case, there would be too many fish that escaped the net. When advancing, they had to stretch the battlefield as much as possible so that they could cover a wider range. Simply put, the entire insect race's great secret realm was divided into 9 plates. Each cultivator army was responsible for 1 plate. Before advancing, all the cultivators had to be on standby at the edge of the plate. Once the order was given, they would advance at the same time. This way, they could plow the entire insect race's great secret realm without any blind spots, and solve some hidden dangers as much as possible. How to discuss the marching plan was a matter for the high-level members of the 2 camps. With the battlefield imprint, the transmission of information between the cultivators of 9 regions was extremely convenient, which made it very convenient for them to jointly carry out some large-scale operations. The high-level officials were quite efficient. In just half a day, they had come up with a plan of action. When the order was given, countless cultivators on the Force Province's side flew to both sides. Looking down from high up in the sky, streams of light radiated to the left and right like a fairy scattering flowers, gradually moving further and further away. Every once in a while, a team would stay behind. After a while, a warrior of the Spirit Sea realm would stay behind. This was the area they were responsible for. No one gave any orders to who would stay and who would continue forward. At this moment, everyone was acting according to their own will. They were all cultivators above the true lake stage, so they had their own judgment to rely on. There was no need for others to say anything. Such a dispersion of forces was undoubtedly fatal in the early stages of the war. But at this time, It was the only choice. Using different methods to deal with feng shui at different times could maximize the cultivator's ability. Along the way, they kept leaving their forces behind while the rest continued to move forward along the edge of the insect race's great mystery realm. Lu Yi went to the right and flew at the front. It was not because he had the highest cultivation level. Now there were many cultivators with higher cultivation levels than him. However, because he had the experience of exploring the entire insect race's great mystery realm, the Force Province gave him a mission. That was to connect with the army of the neighboring continents and ensure that the two sides could connect seamlessly. There were also people on the other side who accepted this mission. As the front line continued to move forward, the number of cultivators following behind them became fewer and fewer. Occasionally, a battle would break out, but in front of this brilliant army of cultivators that was like a swarm of locusts, these insects could not do anything. After flying forward for a full day, there were less than 200 cultivators following behind Lu Yi. Then, he saw a large stream of light coming from afar. The leading Spirit Sea Realm cultivator of the other side met with Lu Yi's divine sense, and they both stopped. The cultivators behind them continued to move forward, filling up the empty space in the front line. In this way, the front line between the Force Province and the neighboring continents was completely opened. Next, they only needed to wait for orders. The leading Spirit Sea Realm cultivator flew over and landed beside Lu Yi. He looked at him with interest. "Are you little friend Lu Yi from the Blue Blood sect?" Lu Yi silently chewed on a spirit pill, preparing for battle, and glanced at him. "We have a grudge." The neighboring continent was the Thunder Province, and the Thunder Province was controlled by the Myriad Demon Ridge. This Spirit Sea Realm cultivator was undoubtedly a cultivator from one of the Myriad Demon Ridge's sects. Lu Yi could not help but be a little vigilant when he came over for no reason. Now that the two factions had joined hands, the grudges of the past could not be said to have really disappeared. In his own camp, Yu Huajin did not hesitate to betray him and tried to kill him. Although Lu Yi was not old, he was still very vigilant. However, the other party's cultivation was at the 7th Order Divine Sea Realm. Even if there was a grudge between them, Lu Yi did not care. The Spirit Sea Realm cultivator chuckled. "Does little friend have too many enemies?" Lu Yi said indifferently, "I can't help it. When I was young, I offended a lot of people from the Myriad Demon Ridge. I have to be careful when I meet strangers." The man laughed. "Little friend is still young. Perhaps there's some enmity between them. However, in places like the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield, there's nothing that can be done about it. Fighting is the only way to grow stronger. When it comes to cultivation, there's always fighting. Everyone has come from that kind of fighting. You just can't do anything about it, can you? I am Yu Shun from the 10,000 Dharma sect. I have a disciple who worked with Little Friend for a period of time. He highly admires Little Friend's ability. 10,000 Dharma sect." Lu Yi instantly reacted. Lu Qing. Back in the broken Peerless continent, one of the team members was from the 10,000 Dharma sect. It was Lu Qing. He could be considered one of the most elite young talents of this generation in the 9 states. He had obtained a good ranking in the Cloud River battle and thought highly of himself. However, after coming into contact with Lu Yi on the Peerless continent, he realized that he was a frog at the bottom of a well. After being humiliated, he became brave and worked hard. "He's not bad," Yushin said. "In ordinary times, Lu Qing is indeed good. In Little Friend's generation, he seems to be a bit of a failure. In comparison, Little Friend has already walked in front of all of his peers, making him unreachable." Although Lu Qing had been cultivating hard these past few years, he was still only at the True Lake realm. On the other hand, Lu Yi was already at the 4th Order Divine Sea Realm. In terms of speed, no other young man of the same age could match him. Of course, Li Taibai had appeared in the Myriad Demon Ridge. It was said that his cultivation speed could keep up with Lu Yi's. He was also a peerless genius. Yushin came to find Lu Yi for no particular purpose. Lu Yi's name was there. Although he was still young and only at the 4th Order Divine Sea Realm, no one could underestimate his future. It could be said that in the future, The two heroes of the war province were destined to bloom with more dazzling light than others. The 9 states would eventually be their world. Therefore, Yushin just came to chat with him. No matter how the two camps got along in the future, at least for now, they were friends and not enemies. Lu Yi knew another person from the 10,000 Dharma sect besides Lu Qing, and that was Tofuji from the blood refining world. Among the several dozen old seniors of the Blue Blood Holy Land, Lu Yi had the most contact with Yuji, mainly because he was always caught by her to sell tofu. Lu Yi had benefited a lot from Yuji's teachings on how to deal with Dharma cultivators and how to kill Dharma cultivators more effectively. From this point alone, Lu Yi didn't have much malice towards the 10,000 Dharma sect, so he was happy to chat with Yushin. However, there was a gap in age between the two, so after a few words, there was no topic to talk about. It was quite awkward. Lu Yi tried to find something to talk about. I heard that the 10,000 Dharma sect used to have an extraordinary character, a woman. Yushin smiled slightly. Little friend is young, but he is quite knowledgeable. Nowadays, very few people know about that elder of my 10,000 Dharma sect. Speaking of which, the reason why my 10,000 Dharma sect can be ranked as a first-order sect is because of the foundation laid by that elder. Where is that elder now? If we count her age, she should still be alive. Yushin shook his head and said, I don't know about that, but it is said that she has been in seclusion for many years. Whether she is alive or dead, only the sect master and a limited number of people are qualified to know. In fact, it is not just my 10,000 Dharma sect. After so many years in the war province, those top sects have always had monstrous characters who were lucky enough to be born in a certain era. If we count their age, many of them are still alive, but what they pursue is different from us, so they are basically in a life and death situation, hoping to break through that layer of mystery. Lu Yi thought to himself, what a bullshit life and death situation. They have already gone to other realms to sell tofu, and a group of disciples and grand disciples still don't know about it. But he also roughly understood something. People like Yuji and Jian Guhong had lived for too long. They had lived less than a few hundred years, and more than 1,000 years. It was indeed difficult for the disciples and grand disciples of this era to know about their recent situation. The people of the same era as them were probably all dead. In the eyes of the later generations, these people were all in a life and death situation, so who would dare to rashly disturb them? This led to the situation where the ancestors of the various sects were sent to the blood refining realm, but the sects were kept in the dark. There was no need to tell this to Yushin, and it was difficult to gain his trust. But then again, could he use the token Yuji gave him to bring a group of reinforcements from the 10,000 Dharma sect to the blood refining realm? The only reinforcements he could pull now were from Tai Mountain. Lu Yi didn't know how many people there would be, but it would certainly not be too many. After all, the distance was long, and transmission was inconvenient. He could only choose the best of the best, and try to choose some powerful cultivators. If he cooperated with the 10,000 Dharma sect, he could at least bring more people over. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 11:16. Lu Yi did not only have the one token given to him by Yuji, he had dozens of others. These seniors came from all over the 9 continents, and were basically all from high-ranking sections. Even if each sect sent out a few people, the power they could gather would not be small. When the time comes, they could form a 9 continents allied army to conquer the blood-refining world and wipe out the injustice and darkness. It was just an idea. It wasn't easy to implement it. They had to think about it at length. Time passed slowly as he chatted with Yushin, until a certain moment, an order was given. The counterattack had begun. The front line of the 9 regions cultivator army had been completely spread out at the edge of the insect race's great mystery realm. There was almost no place left out. Following the order, everyone quickly rushed forward and killed the insect race that they encountered along the way. The true lake stage cultivators only had one mission: to advance in a straight line, eliminate all obstacles along the way. However, the divine ocean stage cultivators' mission was more complicated. They had to constantly advance forward while patrolling a certain area. They had to eliminate the opponents that the true lake stage cultivators found difficult to deal with and minimize casualties. This method of advancement was slightly more troublesome in the early stages. Because the front line was too long, the troops were too scattered. Once the true lake stage cultivators encountered strong insects, it would be difficult to deal with them. If there were no divine ocean stage cultivators to support them in time, there might be casualties. However, there was a benefit to this method of carpet-style advancement, which was that it could annihilate the insectoids in the insectoid race's secret realm. Not many of them would escape the net, and it could reduce the pressure on the cultivators guarding the door. Moreover, as time passed, the front line would shrink rapidly, and the troops would become more and more concentrated. In the end, the 9 continents army would gather at the center of the insect race's great secret realm. At that time, it would be the final battle. Lu Yi turned into a stream of light and flew around in the air. He would occasionally kill the insects he encountered. His advancement was smooth and unimpeded. Currently, there were not many insects in the periphery of the insect race's great secret realm. There were also not many strong insects, so it was not difficult to advance. Even for those true lake stage cultivators, they formed small teams with the help of the twin chi connected array disk. Even if they met some divine ocean stage insectoids, as long as they weren't too strong, they would be able to deal with them. Half a day later, Lu Yi suddenly heard a hurried howl from the side. Someone was asking for help. He immediately changed his direction and rushed towards the source of the howl. At the same time, he responded with a long howl. After flying for a short while, he saw a few figures running towards him in a sorry state. He didn't know which camp these cultivators belonged to. Although they had formed a formation with the help of a formation plate, they weren't strong enough and were currently being chased by a divine sea realm insect. Fortunately, although they weren't a match for the insect, they still had the strength to fight back with the help of the formation. When they heard Lu Ye's whistle, they rushed over to join him. The two sides brushed past each other. Lu Yi dashed towards the spirit sea realm insectoid. Before he arrived, he had already slashed out with his saber. Thud, thud, thud. The insectoid's body trembled violently and was stopped in its tracks. The few true lake stage cultivators were rather daring. When they saw Lu Yi make his move, they immediately turned around and tried to assist him from the side. However, there was no room for them to display their skills. They only saw a sharp blade light flash past, and the divine sea realm insectoid that was chasing them was cut into 2. Insectoid blood splattered all over the sky. Lu Yi didn't stop. There was another howl in the distance. He had to hurry over to help and reduce the losses of the cultivator army as much as possible. The few of them were stunned. A true lake stage 5th order cultivator in the team muttered, "That sir is only a 4th order divine sea realm cultivator, right? How can his saber be so sharp?" The insectoids chasing them weren't weak. An ordinary 4th order divine sea realm cultivator wouldn't be able to deal with their opponent so cleanly. They would have to fight for a while. This was also the reason why they wanted to help immediately after receiving reinforcements. A 4th order divine sea realm cultivator using a saber, and at such a young age. Only he can do that. The true lake stage 8th order leader said thoughtfully. The others instantly reacted. A person's name was like a tree's shadow. The current Lu Yi was no longer a small character, who could only fight in the Spirit Stream realm and Cloud River realm. The insect plague had spread his name throughout the entire 9 regions. He stood at a height that the majority of cultivators in the 9 regions had to look up to. A 4th order divine sea realm cultivation wasn't anything special, but the key was that such a young 4th order divine sea realm cultivator was rare. Moreover, whether it was the twin chi linked spirit array, the exploration of the insect race's great sealed realm alone, or the special method to refine insect blood, all of these were great contributions. It could be said that he had single-handedly facilitated the joint operation of the 9 regions cultivator army. He had also increased the overall strength of the army by 30%. Since ancient times, who could do such a thing? Fortunately, I'm immune to poison. Otherwise, I really would have been poisoned to death by you. Serves you right. Wuxia glared at him. Who told you to sneak over here? She looked at Hoopa. Too. He's bad. Why didn't you remind me? Flashed out of Hoopo's body. She pursed her lips and smiled. I forgot. Wuxia shook her head helplessly. She turned around and continued to urge her secret technique to fight the enemy together with everyone. At this moment, everyone noticed Lu Ye's arrival. However, because of the insect's entanglement, they couldn't be too distracted for the time being. Lu Ye yelled, Is there anyone who needs help? Li Baxian laughed. Little junior brother, just stand there and watch. Lu Ye was just asking casually. He had no intention of interfering, because the battle was almost over. The 6 members of Team D9 were now very strong and had good teamwork. An ordinary true lake stage team might not be able to do anything to such an insect, but Team D9 was more than enough to deal with it. Lu Ye noticed that there were many colorful mushrooms growing on the Divine Ocean stage insect's body. Moreover, they were growing rapidly. As the mushrooms grew, the insect's aura also weakened correspondingly. This was obviously Huaxi's doing. Lu Ye couldn't help but be curious. The last time I saw you, you summoned a big toad. How did it become a spider this time? When did you switch to beast taming? Huaxi urged her secret technique while saying, It's not beast taming. This is my 5 poison envoy. It can grow with my strength. 5 poison envoy. Lu Ye raised his eyebrows. So there are 3 others? Do you want to see? Huaxi asked. Lu Ye rejected decisively. No need. It was one thing for such a gentle woman to cultivate poison, but now she had 5 poison envoys. Each of them looked ferocious and ugly. The inheritance Huaxi obtained from the Spirit Stream battlefield was very strange. But it was undeniable that this inheritance was indeed impressive. Up until now, Lu Ye had never encountered such a strange inheritance. Moreover, she had the ability to plant mushrooms. She could weaken the enemy's strength without anyone noticing and slowly turn the tide of a battle into a fatal one. Team D9's battle went so smoothly because of their individual strength and teamwork. Huaxi's contribution was also not small. After a while, the Divine Ocean stage insect's aura weakened and showed signs of being poisoned. Team D9 was dealing with it more easily. Another whistling sound came from afar. Lu Ye turned to look. Huaxi understood. Go. Be careful. Don't try to be brave. Only then did Lu Ye retract his hand from her waist. After returned to Hoopo's body, he leaped up and headed straight for the source of the whistling sound. Hurried encounters and short meetings were common on the path of cultivation. Especially when the gap in strength widened, it was often difficult to work together. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 11:17. The advance of the 9 states' army was not hindered by many obstacles, and this was due to the overall quality of the cultivators of the 9 states. They were all true lake stage cultivators, and to cultivate to this stage, which one of them didn't have a path filled with bloodshed. The environment of the 9 continents was not stable, and cultivators from the Spirit Stream stage had to enter the Spirit Stream battlefield to fight against the enemy. It was still the same when they reached the Cloud River realm. Later on, they joined the state guards and fought against others, the heavens and themselves. Only after experiencing many dangers could they achieve their current achievements. It could be said that each of them had rich combat experience, and the insect disaster had lasted for several years. Everyone knew what kind of insect race had what kind of attack methods, so it was not difficult to deal with it now. However, it was inevitable that there would be some deaths and injuries. This was unavoidable. Whether it was because of audacity, greed, or lack of support from nearby Spirit Sea realm cultivators, there would always be some reason that led to death. However, compared to the overall size of the 9 states' army, these casualties were nothing. Insect corpses could be seen lying on the ground in the periphery of the insect race's great mystic realm, and the unique color of insect blood dyed the ground green. After Lu Ye completed his reinforcement once again, he raised his head and looked into the distance. There, a huge and ferocious figure stood on the ground, and it was at least 300 meters tall. This giant insect was in existence stronger than the giant insect. No one knew how strong it was, because no one had come into contact with it so far. However, from its power, It was definitely comparable to a ninth-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator. Coupled with its huge body, it was obviously not to be trifled with. However, at this moment several figures were provoking this giant insect. Under Lu Ye's observation, he saw several streams of light crisscrossing around the giant insect, and powerful spiritual energy fluctuations constantly emanated from them. Two of the figures were very familiar, and they were the sect master and Longbow. However, Peng Zhen Suxiu and Mu Suifeng were nowhere to be seen. It seemed that they had other missions. The ones in charge of dealing with this giant insect were the ninth-order Divine Sea Realm cultivators, led by Longbow and the sect master. When one's cultivation had reached their level, it could be said that they had already reached the end of the road. Moreover, they had sufficient time to settle down, so the killer moves they executed were all exquisite and peerless in might. What's more, their teamwork was extremely skillful. Although the giant insect wasn't weak, it was too large and clumsy, so the several ninth-order Divine Sea Realm masters only needed to test it a little before they realized it was a bit flashy. It wasn't difficult to deal with it. The only problem was that the opponent's defensive power was astonishing, so they needed to use more powerful methods to deal with it. This allowed them to relax. Ever since they entered the insect tribe's great secret realm, they had been worried about these giant insects. After all, no one knew what they were capable of. However, after learning a little about them, they realized that their worries were unnecessary. Therefore, they cooperated with each other and used various methods to continuously weaken the giant insect's defense. Moreover, everyone had a tacit understanding to attack the same area, so that they could achieve a more effective attack. They had been fighting for a while now, and cracks had begun to appear on the carapace around the giant insect's neck. It seemed that it wouldn't last much longer. The opportunity was fleeting. Just as Longbow was about to use his methods to deal a ruthless blow to this early worm, a figure suddenly appeared above Shirna's head. A series of urgent crackling sounds came out from the secluded area. First, a 10-meter-tall scarlet figure appeared in everyone's field of vision. This figure appeared so suddenly that Longbow and the others didn't notice it, and neither did the giant insect. That was until the 10-meter-tall scarlet figure raised an exaggeratedly shaped saber. Spirit energy surged, and the saber suddenly ignited with a raging flame. Aiming at the giant insect's neck, the saber viciously slashed down. The carapace around the giant insect's neck was already on the verge of shattering. So how could it resist this slash? The saber only paused for a moment before it smoothly cut through the giant insect's head. The giant insect's head fell to the ground, and blood spurted out. Longbow, who had rushed to the front, had blood all over his face. He cursed angrily and wiped his face. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a familiar figure quickly disappearing into the distance. It was as if he had brushed off his clothes and left, hiding his achievements and fame. It was embarrassing to have one's foot cut off halfway. He recognized who the guy who sneaked into the battlefield was at a glance. That ferocious aura, and that iconic armor. Who else could it be other than that kid from the Blue Blood sect? It was too much to blatantly steal credit under the eyes of the elders. Headmaster Yun Dan Fengqing. The child has grown up, I can't control him. Longbow felt helpless. What else could he say? Did the young man steal it? Xiao Biao grasped the opportunity. At this time, Lu Yi was already 10 miles away. He didn't intend to steal any credit, but simply wanted to feel the power of the giant insect up close. When he saw the opportunity, he couldn't help but make a move. In order to kill in one blow, he even took out the Dragon Emperor. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. 3 days after the 9 Regions Army's frontline advanced, there were some unexpected changes on the battlefield. When Lu Yi received the message and rushed to a gathering place, there were already many cultivators gathered there. There were more than 10 Spirit Sea Realm cultivators, and there were at least a few hundred True Lake Realm cultivators. Moreover, there were constantly nearby cultivators who received the message and rushed over. There was an acquaintance among the Spirit Sea Realm cultivators. It was Nianyu Immortal. Her cultivation was the highest here, so she was naturally the leader. Lu Yi stepped forward and asked, "Senior Sister Nian, what's the situation now?" Nianyu Immortal said, "There is an insect nest in front, but there are a large number of insects gathered near the nest, so we need to gather people. There were too many insectoids gathered there. It wasn't something that a team of divine ocean stage cultivators or true lake stage cultivators could deal with. Looking at the current situation, they could only gather the nearby cultivators and combine them into a single force. Only then could they succeed. This was also the first insect nest they encountered in this direction. Luyi pondered for a moment. "I'll go take a look." As he said that, he leaped up and went deeper into the nest. Although he had explored the insect race's great secret realm before, he was alone the last time and did not dare to expose himself. Therefore, he only circled around the edge of this world. He really did not know what the situation inside the insect race's great secret realm was like. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Right now, everyone was going through a war, so naturally, they had to prioritize gathering information. As they flew forward, the strange thing was that they did not encounter a single insectoid along the way. This was very rare. After flying for dozens of miles, they finally saw an insectoid hive in front of them. Near the hive, large groups of insectoids were gathered. The insectoids were gathered around the periphery of the hive like a well-trained army, waiting for the right moment. After going a little deeper, Luyi spread out his spiritual will to investigate the situation at the insect nest. Under normal circumstances, at such a distance, the fluctuation of spirit energy from Luyi's body should have attracted the attention of the insects. However, Luyi found that although there were some signs of disturbance, none of the insects took the initiative to attack. They all stayed where they were. Luyi could not help but frown. This situation was very strange. One must know that the insects did not have much intelligence and acted based on instinct. This was not only true for the weak insects, but also for the spirit sea realm insects. When the sword hummed, an overwhelming number of spirit techniques blasted towards the insect swarm. At the same time, the insect race's counterattack came one after another. Although most of the insect race did not have long-range attacks, there were still a small number of them who had this ability. Their attacks were not spirit techniques, but more like the display of their own abilities. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 11:18. For example, some insectoids that looked like spiders could spit out spider silk, which was extremely sticky. Once a cultivator came into contact with it, it would be very hard to get rid of it. Some porcupine-like insectoids could shoot out sharp spikes from their backs, which were extremely powerful. To a certain extent, the insect clan and the demon beasts had some similarities. Both of them had many surprising similarities, but all of the insect clan had one obvious characteristic, which was that their bodies were covered with a kind of solid shell. This was something that most demon beasts did not have. Therefore, even though the insectoids had low intelligence, they could still pose a threat to cultivators if they were not careful. Under the attacks of the cultivator army and the insectoids suffered heavy casualties. Compared to the cultivator army's various attacking methods, the insectoids' methods were much weaker. How could they gain any advantage in such an attack? After a round of attacks, countless insectoids were killed. Other than a few true lake stage cultivators who were not careful enough and were injured, the rest were unharmed. As if they realized that if this continued, they would be completely wiped out. The insectoids guarding the periphery of the insectoid nest could no longer hold back and charged forward against the cultivators' attacks. Most of the insectoids were killed along the way. The few that managed to charge to the front could not do much. The cultivators at the front of the army were not to be trifled with. From the left, middle, and right, 20 cultivators of the Divine Sea stage attacked together. Using all sorts of methods, the insectoid corpses piled up into mountains. The Thought Moon Immortal's flying sword whizzed back and forth. At times it would turn into a sword dragon. At other times it would condense into a slash. Even those insectoids at the level of giant insectoids could not withstand her flying swords. The three armies continued to advance, neither too fast nor too slow, steadily clearing out the insect race in sight. This battle only lasted for less than an hour before it came to an end. Naturally, the cultivators had achieved a complete victory. As far as the eye could see, there were insectoid corpses everywhere. Even the insectoid nest on the ground had become tattered. Although the insectoids on the ground had been cleared out, under the detection of spiritual will, they could still clearly sense that there were many insectoids hidden deep underground. These insectoids were obviously hiding inside the insectoid nest. An insectoid nest was not just the part on the surface. That was only a small part of the nest. The true magnificence of the insectoid nest was the part hidden underground. The part that could not be seen was the main body of the insectoid nest. During the battle just now, many of the insectoids had retreated into their hives and disappeared without a trace. Right now it was clear that they were hiding inside. Now that the visible enemies had been dealt with, they naturally had to deal with the invisible ones as well. Only then would they be able to do their best. Many divine sea realm cultivators gathered around the Thought Moon Immortal. She made some simple arrangements and went deep into the worm's nest. 20 spiritual ocean stage cultivators rushed in one after another, followed by groups of true lake stage cultivators. As soon as he entered the nest, a dark and cold aura assaulted his senses. There was also an extremely unpleasant smell. Luyi had experience entering the depths of an insectoid nest before. Whether it was the spirit stream battlefield or the realm of beasts, they were both considered to have entered the depths of an insectoid nest. However, the insectoid nests they had encountered on those two occasions were on a completely different level compared to this one. Using his divine telekinesis, he could sense that the tunnels inside the hive extended in all directions and had many forks. Many insectoids were hiding in these forks, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Even if it was the spiritual will of the spirit sea realm, there was no way to clearly explore the path underground. Coupled with the limitations of the terrain, there was only one way to exterminate the Zergs underground. Let's split up. As the paths diverged, in less than half a cup of tea's time, Luyi was all alone. As he moved forward, he searched for and killed insectoids. Luyi had no idea how deep he had gone. However, with his divine sense, he could sense the auras of human cultivators nearby. From time to time, battles would break out and spiritual energy would surge. A carpet search like this would undoubtedly consume a lot of time. But in order to ensure that not too many fish escaped the net, this was the only way. At the very least, they had to destroy the insectoid nest, or it would continue to hatch new insectoids. Half an hour later, while Luyi was still searching, a divine sense suddenly appeared from a certain direction. Someone found the core of the hive. Luyi immediately changed his direction and rushed towards the source of the divine sense, passing through countless forks along the way. During the journey, violent spiritual energy fluctuations came from that direction. Clearly, the divine sea realm cultivators were fighting with the insectoids. By the time Luyi finally arrived, the battle was already about to end. This was a huge chamber. The walls and ground were covered with fleshy walls. Entering this place was like entering the stomach of some creature. On the fleshy walls, there were sarcoma-like things of various sizes. Inside those sarcomas were incubating insectoids. The core of the insectoid hive was guarded by insectoid guards all year round. These guards were usually the strongest existences in the entire insectoid swarm, and every single one of them was at the level of a large insectoid. They were born to guard the core, and they would not leave even if they died. There seemed to be a lot of them, but with the cooperation of many divine sea realm cultivators, they were still killed until rivers of blood flowed. Thought Moon Immortal had arrived long ago. Her flying sword swept back and forth, sweeping everything in its path. Luyi hurriedly joined the battle. In a short while all the insectoid guards were killed. Among the divine sea realm cultivators who rushed here, several were injured. Fortunately, their injuries were not serious. The main reason was that this kind of environment was a bit cramped for divine sea realm cultivators, making it difficult for them to display their skills. At the center of the chamber stood a huge sarcomas. This was the core of the entire hive. There were life nuclei inside, which were also the energy source for the insectoid's incubation. Thought Moon Immortal stepped forward and cut open the sarcomas, taking out all the life nuclei. This could be considered as cutting off the energy source of the hive. Even if they left it alone, it would not be able to incubate any more insectoids. Of course, it would be best to destroy the entire chamber. Only then would it be considered as cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. This task fell on Lu Yi and another divine sea realm cultivator. Both of them had fire attribute spiritual energy, so they were the most suitable for this kind of job. After a while, when everyone left the chamber, Lu Yi and the cultivator used their own methods. Raging flames burned, and a pungent smell quickly spread. Thought Moon Immortal's divine sense fluctuated as she sent out a message. All the cultivators still underground retreated along the original path. Then they regrouped and continued to advance. The advance of the 9 states cultivator army did not encounter too many twists and turns. The 9th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators worked together to deal with the giant insects they encountered in advance. The insectoid hives they encountered were also uprooted. The trend of the war was that the human race was showing a crushing advantage. This was undoubtedly what everyone wanted, and it was also reasonable. With the massive size of the 9 states cultivators, no less than 80% of their elites had rushed into the insect race's great mystic realm. If they could not easily deal with the problem, it would be troublesome. The speed of their advance was getting faster and faster. The main reason was that as they advanced, the army lines surrounding the entire insect race's great mystic realm became shorter and shorter, and the cultivator's strength became more and more concentrated. With more people, killing the enemy naturally became more convenient. Half a month later, since the start of the 3rd stage of the counterattack on the insect race's great mystic realm, teams of varying numbers had arrived at the center of the insect race's great mystic realm. At this point, everyone stopped. More teams gathered and stopped at the same time. Another day later, the 9 states army had formed an encirclement around the center of the insect race's great mystic realm. At this point, the 9 cultivator armies had officially joined forces. This also meant that they had carried out a carpet cleansing of the entire insect race's great mystic realm. In the past half a month, the number of insects killed was uncountable. Even dozens of giant insects were killed. Over 100 insectoid nests were uprooted. At this point in the war, victory was in sight, but it was not over yet. That was because there was still a giant insectoid hive standing at the center of the insect race's great mystic realm. It was much larger than the insectoid hives everyone had seen along the way. If the insectoid hives they had seen before were thatched huts, then this insectoid hive was a magnificent palace. There was no comparison between the two. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, it would be hard to imagine that an insectoid hive could give off a magnificent feeling. But that was the case. Although the size of the insectoid hive did not mean that the insect race was strong, everyone realized that there were probably many giant insectoids hidden under this hive. This was the last checkpoint in their counterattack on the insect race's great mystic realm. As long as they removed this insectoid hive, it would mean a complete victory for the 9 states army. Since they had come this far, they naturally had to do it perfectly. The area outside the insectoid hive was empty, and not a single insect could be seen. The leaders of the 9 great mystic realms had gathered to discuss their next countermeasures. They needed to consider how to remove this insectoid hive more effectively, and how to reduce their casualties as much as possible. On the Force Prefecture's front line, Lu Yi and Team D9 gathered together. They looked at the giant insectoid hive together, and were amazed. Li Baxian said, "With such a big insectoid hive, there should be a lot of insects inside. Who knows? We'll only be able to see it if we kill our way in." Lu Yi shook his head. It was strange. When he encountered the insectoid hives earlier, he could more or less sense some hidden auras of the insect race with his spiritual will. However, in front of this last insectoid hive, his spiritual will sensed that it was empty. There were no traces of living beings, as if there were no insects underground. Of course, it could also be that the insect race was hiding too deeply. With this insectoid hive removed, this counterattack can be considered a perfect end. "What's your plan next, junior brother?" "Work hard on cultivation," Lu Yi replied casually. However, he had a vague feeling that the day he returned to the blood refinement realm was not too far away. Although there were no clear signs, and there was no call from heaven, it was a kind of intuition. Therefore, he still had a lot to do. He had to think carefully about whether he should use the tokens given by the old seniors to rope in more experts. However, before that, he had to figure out one thing. How many people could he bring back to the blood refinement realm this time? Chapter 11:19. Teleportation consumed energy, and the amount of energy consumed depended on two factors: distance and size. The further the distance, the larger the size, and the more energy consumed. Take Lu Yi himself for example. He was now in the Divine Ocean tier. So the amount of energy he needed to activate the teleportation array was many times greater than when he was in the Cloud River tier. Because his cultivation base had increased from the Cloud River tier to the Divine Ocean tier. The increase in strength was also a change in size. So the amount of energy consumed was naturally incomparable. The distance between the 9 states and the blood refining realm was vast. So the amount of energy needed to teleport was enormous. This was also the reason why Dao 13 had stayed behind when he returned to the 9 states last time. Back then, he, Wuji, and the others were teleported to the broken Peerless Continent by Tianji. However, the Peerless Continent should not have been too far from the 9 states, because not long after they solved the problem of the Peerless Continent, the broken Peerless Continent merged with the Cloud River battlefield and became a part of the Cloud River battlefield. Moreover, at that time, everyone was only in the Cloud River tier, so their energy consumption was not too great. Thus, Tianji could easily send them over. However, if Lu Yi wanted to bring reinforcements to the blood refining realm this time, they would have to be in the Divine Ocean tier. And the higher the tier, the better. The energy consumption would be immeasurable. He did not want to spend so much effort to get a large group of helpers, only to find that Tianji could only teleport a limited number of people. That would be a waste of effort. However, Lu Yi did not know how to determine how many people he could bring over. He could not ask anyone about this. He could only hope that Tianji would give him some inspiration at the right time. Cultivation requires hard work, but you can't let down a beauty. Li Baxian lowered his voice and glanced in Hua Xi's direction. Junior Marshal sister Hua Xi is a good woman. Junior Marshal brother still has to take action when needed. Speaking of love, Lu Yi could not help but look at Li Baxian with a complicated expression. Should he inform 4th senior brother in advance and tell him that eldest senior brother was still alive? Otherwise, the seniority would be a bit messy in the future. What's on my face? Li Baxian touched his face. Lu Yi shook his head. Nothing, I just thought of something. It was better not to talk about it for the time being. Furthermore, this matter was not something that an outsider could interfere with. Everything would be fine when it came to it. He believed that eldest senior brother would not be unreasonable. Moreover, based on the current situation, eldest sister-in-law seemed to be letting Li Baxian do as she pleased. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let Feng Yu stay by Li Baxian's side. As a mother, Feng Yu wasn't worried, so why should she be worried? While they were talking, the sect masters of the 9 states had already agreed on a specific location. Then a vigorous voice called out, "All 9th Order cultivators gather here." Clearly, they were gathering the strongest cultivators to form an elite force. The environment inside the insect nest was not suitable for large numbers of people to enter. Under such circumstances, sending out the best people to deal with the situation was the best choice. In an instant, figures from the 9 armies flew over, each with an astonishing aura. Soon more than 200 people had gathered. Although 9th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators were not elusive, it was still not easy for ordinary cultivators to meet them. But at this moment, there were more than 200 people gathered here. It could be said that, except for a few 9th Order cultivators, who stayed behind to guard the 9 states, the rest were all here. This was also the strongest group of cultivators in the entire 9 states. After a short exchange, over 200 silhouettes disappeared into the hive. In this final battle, not to mention Lu Yi, a 4th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivator, was not qualified to participate. Even those 8th Order cultivators could only wait. It was not bad. After a month of fighting, the cultivators were actually very tired. Taking advantage of this opportunity to rest and wait for the ninth order cultivators to solve the final problem before returning to the capital. After this, the insect plague would be eliminated, and it would not be long before the 9 states would recover. The next problem that the cultivators had to face was very practical. After this in-depth cooperation between the two camps, how should they establish their positions in the future? Should they continue the endless confrontation from before? Or should they stop fighting and make peace with each other? This was probably unrealistic, because cultivators needed all kinds of resources to cultivate, and resources had to be earned or snatched. Therefore, a cultivator's life was destined to be full of battles and disputes. With such a large number of cultivators in the 9 states, everyone had their own pursuits and grievances. Wanting them to coexist peacefully was a fantasy. However, these were issues that the higher-ups of the two camps needed to consider. If one's status and strength did not reach that level, it was meaningless to consider these issues. Time passed, and after more than 2 hours, an extremely faint spirit energy fluctuation came from the depths of the ground. It was so faint that only the divine sense of a divine sea realm cultivator could sense it. Lu Yi knew that the final battle between the human race and the insect race had broken out. Lu Yi hadn't reached that level yet, so he couldn't feel it, but generally, after reaching the 7th order, cultivators could clearly feel that there was an invisible force suppressing the growth of their strength. But so far, no one had been able to figure out what kind of force it was. Therefore, in the environment of the 9 states, every cultivator who could break through to the 9th order was a giant among men. News of the battle in the insect nest spread quickly. Cultivators below the spirit sea realm were helpless in the face of such a situation. All they could do was wait. The divine sea realm cultivators were also divided into 2 factions. One faction wanted to send people to support the 9th order cultivators. At the very least, they wanted to rescue them. Most of the people who supported this idea were sect cultivators who had lost their divine sea realm cultivators. The other faction wanted to wait and see. If even the 9th order cultivators could not solve the problem, then it would be pointless for others to enter the insect nest. For the first time, the 9 states army, which had been united for a month, showed signs of division. Cultivators were also human and had their own shortcomings. When things were going well, everything would be fine, but once there was a setback, there would be all kinds of different opinions and persistence. It could not be said that one side was wrong. Everyone had their own judgment and reason. This kind of debate was not a confrontation between 2 camps. Even if they were from the same camp, there would be different opinions. But everyone knew that they had to come up with a solution as soon as possible. While they were arguing, the 9th order cultivators were still struggling below. No one knew how long they could last. "We can't go," a spirit sea realm cultivator said loudly. If they felt that it was necessary to support them, they would have taken the initiative to send a message. There are more than 200 of them, but not a single one has sent a message for help. It means that the situation below is not as simple as we think. They must also think that support is useless. If we rashly go in, it will only add to the casualties, so we must not go. This is very reasonable, and has received the support of many people. Moreover, the situation has not reached that point yet. Those fellow cultivators may have a chance to kill their way out. If we rashly go to support them, we will only add to the chaos. More people fell into contemplation, but soon someone refuted, and there was a lot of noise. At the place where the cultivators of the war province gathered, Lu Yi tapped on the battlefield mark. He wanted to send a message to the sect master, or the missing moon immortal, to ask about the situation, but he was afraid that it would distract them. In the end, he gave up on the idea of sending a message. He stood up and rushed straight to the insect nest. He would know what was happening below after seeing it with his own eyes. No matter what choice others made, he had already made a decision. If the sect master and senior sister Nian were really in a disadvantageous situation, then he would naturally go to support them. It was impossible for him to sit back and do nothing. If the situation was not as bad as he imagined, he was confident that with his own strength, he would not become a burden to the two of them. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 1120. As soon as Lu Yi moved, he immediately attracted the attention of many Spirit Sea Realm cultivators. Soon, some of them followed him silently. More and more people gathered. Those Spirit Sea Realm cultivators who insisted on observing the situation didn't stop them. They could express their opinions and stand by their own judgment, but they wouldn't rashly interfere with others' actions. This was the principle of living in this world. Lu Yi didn't care about the people following behind him. To him, it didn't matter even if he was alone. After rushing into the insect nest, he immediately found a passage and rushed straight down. As soon as he entered the insect nest, he noticed that something was wrong. This hive was fundamentally different from the hives he had encountered before. The passages inside the insect nests he had encountered before were just simple insect tunnels. They were tunnels opened up underground by the insect race to make it convenient for them to enter and exit. However, the insect tunnel here was surrounded by a layer of meat walls. Meat walls were usually only seen in the core of an insect nest, and were not present in the insect tunnels. However, the insect tunnel in this insect nest was actually covered with meat walls, which was somewhat unusual. As he rushed, he pulled out the mountain coiling saber and dragged it along. The sharp blade cut open the meat walls, and immediately, a fishy smell spread out. Lu Yi checked his talent tree and found nothing abnormal. This meant that the smell was simply unpleasant and not poisonous. There was also nothing leaking out from the meat walls. It was no different from the meat walls Lu Yi had seen in the core of the insect nests before. He continued to go deeper, with a large number of cultivators following behind him. Along the way, there were no traces of battle, nor did they encounter any insect race. It's different from the other hives. It's inside the other hives. It was necessary to go deeper, but here, there was no obstruction. However, Lu Yi felt uneasy in his heart. After all, if things had gone so smoothly, the Ninth Order cultivators would have solved the problem long ago. So far, Lu Yi still didn't know what kind of enemy they had encountered. After a few dozen breaths, a sudden change occurred. The meat walls around suddenly squirmed rapidly, and then expanded. In the blink of an eye, the entire insect tunnel was filled. Lu Yi felt that he was wrapped in a piece of rotten meat in an instant. His mouth and nose were filled with a fishy smell, and there was a soft and sticky feeling all around him. Exclamation sounded. He wasn't the only one who was trapped in the wall of flesh. All of the cultivators following behind him were also caught in the same situation. In a split second, the violent spiritual energy fluctuated chaotically. Everyone was trying their best to break free from the shackles of the meat wall. Lu Yi pulled out his saber with great difficulty. As his spiritual power surged, he used the third move of the tyrant saber. Lotus Sunday dazzling light bloomed, and the incomparably sharp saber light exploded like a blooming lotus. With him as the center, the saber light cut through the void. The feeling of being bound instantly disappeared, and a huge hole was immediately cleared out in the wall of flesh surrounding him. However, as soon as he escaped, before he could do anything else, the empty hole was once again filled up by the squirming flesh wall, and the feeling of being squeezed and restrained came from all directions again. The restraining force was very strong. It felt as if someone was holding him in the palm of his hand. Even his breathing became difficult. Cultivators below the Spirit Sea realm would probably explode under such a restrictive force. Even Spirit Sea realm cultivators would be in trouble if their cultivation was low and their physique wasn't strong enough. Lu Yi could feel the sounds of several lives withering behind him, mixed with a few short screams. Someone had already met with misfortune. This was truly a failure. They were supposed to support the Ninth Order realm masters who were fighting, but as soon as they entered the insect nest, they had already suffered losses. Lu Yi was fine for the time being, but he could clearly feel that the restraining force around him was getting stronger and stronger. If he didn't find a way to get rid of the meat wall, sooner or later, he wouldn't be able to bear it. In fact, in the face of such a crisis, the best way to deal with it was to summon the dragon throne. But he was completely wrapped in the meat wall at the moment, so there was no space for it. Moreover, The tunnel under the insect nest wasn't very wide, so it wouldn't be easy to use the dragon throne. Retreat! Retreat! Someone shouted from behind. After just a short contact, everyone realized the seriousness of the problem. It wasn't too difficult to destroy the meat wall surrounding them. After all, everyone was in the spirit sea realm, so their methods were quite sharp. But the key was that this thing was growing too fast. Even if it was destroyed, it would regrow in an instant and continue to wrap people up. In such a situation, not to mention reinforcements, even self-preservation would become a problem in the long run. So if they wanted to survive, they had to retreat quickly. Lu Yi didn't retreat. Not only did he not retreat, but he also moved forward. But even the power of the third style of the Tyrant Saber could only buy him a breath of time. After that, he would be wrapped up by the meat wall again. At this moment, he was thinking about a question in his heart. When the sect master and the others entered, did they encounter such a thing? They shouldn't have, otherwise, they would have already informed the people outside. Chapter 11:21. The life force contained in the meat wall was clearly in a more mysterious form. Compared to normal life force, it was like the difference between water and ice. Although they were fundamentally the same thing, the life force in the meat wall was much more brilliant and pure. This might be why it could rapidly repair the meat wall. Insect nests stored a large amount of life force inside. This was the energy source for the insect race's incubation, and every hive had a life force nucleus. Now that this life force was so brilliant and pure, it was naturally difficult to deal with. Lu Yi did not know what the sect leader and the others had encountered, but judging from the changes in the meat wall, the enemy they faced was likely to have such characteristics. Otherwise, the top people in 9 provinces would not have fallen into such a predicament. In this way, if he could consume this life force, he could reduce some of the pressure on the sect leader and the others. This was also why Lu Yi deduced that even if he did not rush to the battlefield, he could still provide help to the sect leader and the others as long as he operated properly. His method was to devour, using the talent tree's power to devour, which was his strength. In an instant, a steady stream of life force was absorbed by the talent tree's roots and poured into Lu Ye's body. Looking inside, the talent tree immediately ignited a large amount of gray fog. It was not that this life force was poisonous, but it was an external power after all. After being burned and transformed by the talent tree, it could be turned into Lu Ye's own pure power. The restraining power of the meat wall around him kept increasing, which forced Lu Yi to activate the Lotus Sun every once in a while to buy himself enough time and space to breathe. The 3 forms of the Tyrant Blade, each form was more powerful than the last, but correspondingly, the consumption would also increase. However, as the talent tree devoured and absorbed, the spiritual power consumed by Lu Yi was quickly replenished, and there was even a large amount left. This cycle repeated over and over again. At a certain point, when Lu Yi once again activated the Lotus Sun and broke through the walls of flesh around her, the place she was in became empty. The meat wall no longer grew. Not only that, but the meat wall under his feet was also rapidly disappearing, revealing the original appearance of the passage. Lu Ye's eyes drooped slightly. This sudden change made him even more certain of one thing. Previously, the various changes in the meat wall were controlled by a consciousness. However, as he used the power of the talent tree, the consciousness clearly sensed the strangeness of his methods. It knew that it could not trap him, and would even be absorbed by him. So it did not force it. Lu Yi turned his head and looked around. The path he had come from was filled with walls of flesh, and the path ahead was the same. Only his current position, which was about 30 feet long, was still in the shape of an underground passage. It looked like he was trapped here. But how could this truly trap him? Holding the Panshan saber, Shaochen stepped forward. If the mountain did not come to him, he would come to the mountain. The wall of flesh in front of him began to wriggle and disappear. With every step he took, a section of the wall of flesh that filled the passageway disappeared. However, at the same time, The wall of flesh behind him began to grow, leaving him with only a free space of 30 feet. It was as if the meat wall had a mind of its own, and was constantly shrinking as he moved forward. Even if Lu Yi changed his speed, the meat wall in front of him would still grow and shrink at the same time. Lu Yi was enlightened. This was not because it was afraid of him. It was a silent invitation. It was inviting him to enter the real battlefield. The hidden consciousness knew that the meat wall alone would not be able to do anything to him. If it wanted to get rid of him, it would have to let him enter the battlefield. This was exactly what Lu Yi wanted. He was originally a little worried about how to find the correct path in the winding passageway. However, since the other party wanted to invite him, he did not have to worry about not finding the right path. He just had to follow the direction in which the meat wall disappeared. His speed became faster and faster. Lu Yi could clearly feel that the ripples of battle were getting closer and closer to him. Until a certain moment, he charged into a huge space. In an instant, the ripples of spiritual power could be felt from all directions. In his field of vision, figures shuttled back and forth. Many mysterious techniques were used continuously. It was a lively scene. Lu Yi did not have time to observe the battlefield when he heard the sound of something breaking beside him. Following that, a sharp aura quickly attacked him. He quickly turned his head and saw a mantis insect race brandishing a mantis blade towards him. The body of this mantis was obviously larger than the ones he had seen before, and it was constantly flashing with light. He could clearly see that there were several extremely mysterious patterns on its body, and even the carapace on its back was glowing with a metallic luster. Not far away, on the meat wall, there was a broken flesh sac. It looked like a scar on the meat wall, but it was quickly healing. This was obviously an insect race that had just hatched. Moreover, its aura was at the 8th order Divine Sea realm, which was somewhat unreasonable. Although insect race hatching was simple, their growth was also a gradual process. It was impossible for an insect race to possess great strength as soon as they hatched. If that were the case, there would not be so many low-level insect race insects. Lu Yi did not know what this big insect was, but since it could be hatched in this place, it was obviously a guard of the insect race nest. Moreover, it was specifically targeted at him. Otherwise, it would not have appeared at such a close distance. The consciousness's confidence in letting him enter the battlefield should have come from here. The meat wall could not deal with Lu Yi, and was even restrained by him, but these insect race guards could. If it were any other 4th order Divine Sea realm cultivator, they might have been unlucky to be ambushed like this by an insect race guard. However, the consciousness had clearly underestimated Lu Ye's ability. The mountain coiling saber was unsheathed. In the next moment, the sound of metal colliding rang out. The mantis insect race's mantis blade was blocked. Lu Yi took advantage of the momentum and pushed the insect race backwards, leaving its chest wide open. In the next moment, an endless starry sky spread out and stars fell from the sky. In the blink of an eye, the insect race had been stabbed dozens of times. Blood spurted out, but it did not die. Its already ferocious aura became even more berserk. It let out a sharp cry from its mouth, as if it was suffering great pain. Its body staggered as if it was drunk. Although the injuries on its body were serious, they were not fatal to it. However, since the mountain coiling saber had merged with the soul-splitting saber, it could not only injure the enemy's body, but also cut their soul. This kind of invisible attack was the most deadly, even if it was an insect comparable to an 8th order Divine Sea master. In the end, its sentience was low and its soul was weak. After being struck like this, its soul instantly became unstable. Taking advantage of this good opportunity, Lu Yi passed by it. As soon as the sword light flashed, Dumb Insect's body stiffened. When Lu Yi stood up again, its head fell straight to the ground, and its headless body kept twitching. A series of divine senses swept over from all directions. Obviously, these 9th order masters had noticed Lu Ye's intrusion, but this was a normal occurrence. Everyone here was a 9th order master, so the sudden appearance of a 4th order master was as conspicuous as a lamp in the dark. When they discovered his tracks, they were all surprised. A figure wrapped in sword light appeared beside Lu Yi. It was Thought Moon Immortal. Why are you here? Come in and take a look. He looked towards the center of this space. Under the illumination of the flashing lights all around, there was an extremely bloated figure that looked like a fat meat worm. However, it had more than a dozen thin and long claws, which were spread out on both sides of its body. At this moment, it was waving its claws wildly, blocking all the attacks coming at it. At the position of its head, two scarlet eyes stared fixedly at Lu Yi. The moment their eyes met, Lu Yi understood that this was the source of the consciousness controlling the meat wall. In other words, this bloated insect was controlling the meat wall, and it was it that led Lu Yi into this space. This invisible force suddenly gathered and turned into a shockwave that slammed towards Lu Yi. Thought Moon Immortal's face changed. Be careful! In a flash, she appeared between Lu Yi and the insect, a bright light shining from her body. However, she was still a step too late. Moreover, divine sense attacks were extremely fast and could not be intercepted even if one wanted to. This was different from normal attacks. Thought Moon Immortal was well aware of the strength of this insect's divine sense. It could be said that everyone present had suffered losses at its hands, so she could not help but look at Lu Yi with some worry, fearing that something bad would happen to him. In fact, it was precisely because the other party's divine sense was too terrifying that they didn't call for help. In comparison, the power of that divine sense had already surpassed the divine sea realm. Even if they were ninth-order cultivators, it would be extremely difficult for them to resist. Only people like them could withstand such a divine sense attack. If it had been someone with a lower cultivation, they would have died in an instant. The several ninth-order masters who had died before had died, because their souls had been destroyed by the bloated insects due to their lack of soul attainments. When the huge divine sense attack arrived, Lu Yi's soul defense was as fragile as a paper lake and was directly torn apart. Immediately after, the power blasted into his spirit sea. In the next moment, waves surged in his spirit sea, but under the suppression of the soul-suppressing tower, the surging waves quickly calmed down. It wasn't a big deal. It felt as if someone had taken a big hammer made of cotton and hit him fiercely. The impact was strong, but there was no way to cause any substantial damage to him. At the same time, the meat wall around Lu Yi quickly bulged and turned into meat sacks. These meat sacks burst open, and insect race guards appeared one after another, swarming towards him. There were so many of them that even Thought Moon Immortal was shocked. Even she could not deal with so many insect race guards at the same time. Each of these things was at the level of a giant insect, and they were even more difficult to deal with than ordinary giant insects. She immediately wrapped her sword and rushed out with Lu Yi. Chapter 11:22. Does that insect race have sentience? Lu Yi asked while observing the battlefield. At this time, there were still divine senses constantly attacking his divine sea, but under the suppression of the soul-suppressing tower, their efforts were futile. That's the insect queen. A look of discomfort flashed across Thought Moon Immortal's face. Although the insect queen's spiritual attack was aimed at Lu Yi, she was too close to Lu Yi, so it was inevitable that she would be affected. We can end this battle if we take care of it, but its regenerative abilities are too terrifying. Normal injuries are useless against it. After such a long battle, how could the Ninth Order Masters not cause any damage to the Insect Queen? However, no matter how serious the injuries were, the Insect Queen could recover in a very short time. So at this moment, no one knew how to win and could only drag things out. They could also see that the root of the Insect Queen's rapid recovery was its enormous and pure vitality. Could it be that as long as the opponent's vitality was consumed to a certain extent, the Insect Queen would lose its ability to recover? This idea was worth verifying. So even if the situation was extremely bad, the Ninth Order Masters still persevered and fought with the Insect Queen. At their level of cultivation, they had encountered countless crises in their lives, so it was impossible for them to lose their fighting spirit because of a little setback. The situation was still uncertain, and life and death were still undetermined, so no one dared to say that they would definitely lose. Speaking of which, their encounter this time was completely unexpected. Back then, they had followed the passage all the way here, and everything had been fine. They had not encountered a single insectoid along the way, but after arriving here, the situation had become strange. In this huge space, only the insect queen was waiting for them. Then a battle broke out. The insect queen seemed to be all alone, but in fact, it could hatch a large number of guards at any time. Coupled with its extremely powerful spiritual energy, it caused the most elite team in the 9 regions to suffer a loss in a single exchange. Almost everyone was dizzy from the impact of its spiritual energy, and it was at that time that casualties appeared. Although they were all 9th Order masters, there was a certain gap in strength between them. Some people with stronger souls could resist the insect queen's soul attack, while others with weaker souls could not. Fortunately, there were only a few casualties, and the remaining 9th Order masters all had extremely solid foundations. So after a hasty counterattack, a fierce battle began. Insect Queen, Luyi muttered thoughtfully. This was the first time he had heard of such a title. Throughout his journey, he had participated in several operations to remove insect nests, but none of those nests had ever contained an insect queen. Perhaps it was because the hive was not big enough? This insectoid hive was located at the center of the insectoid race's secret realm. It was also the largest insectoid hive, which was why the insectoid queen was here. Of course, whether it was the insect queen that created the hive, or the hive that gave birth to the insect queen, there was no way to tell. It was like the question of whether the chicken laid the egg, or the egg laid the chicken. There was no conclusion. There are no life nuclei here? Luyi asked. The Thought Moon Immortal shook her head. No, all of the vitality is concentrated in the insect queen's body. Luyi had already noticed this, because the vitality of the insect queen was truly astonishing. At this moment, there were more than a dozen 9th Order masters surrounding the insect queen and fighting it. Occasionally, their attacks would break through its defenses and leave light or heavy injuries on its body. But no matter how serious the injuries were, they would recover in the blink of an eye under the effect of the insect queen's immense vitality. The speed of recovery was even faster than the growth of the meat walls. We also thought of retreating temporarily to avoid the brunt of the attack, but this place has been completely sealed off. There is no way to escape. The thick meat walls surrounded the entire space, and the speed of destruction could not keep up with the growth of the meat walls, so it was impossible to open up a path. It could be said that the moment the 9th Order masters entered this place, there was no way out. The entrance where Luyi had entered had long been filled by the meat walls. You shouldn't have come in, the Thought Moon Immortal sighed. With so many 9th Order masters gathered here, there was nothing they could do about the insect queen. Luyi had barged in alone, so it was really a disaster. Fortunately, Luyi was strong enough, so even if his cultivation was lower, he would not become a burden. This was also why Luyi dared to barge in. At this moment, he was considering a problem. Since the insect queen could quickly hatch so many powerful insect race guards, why did it lead him to this battlefield? It could have easily dispatched the insect race guards to deal with him in the passage. If that was the case, he might not be able to stop it alone. The insect queen did not choose to do so, not because it did not want to, but because it could not. In other words, although these insect race guards that could quickly hatch were powerful, there was a huge drawback to them. It was very likely that they could not easily leave this place. It was precisely because of the special environment here that the insect race guards were able to hatch with such powerful combat power. So the insect queen could only lead him in. Just like how it had allowed the 9th Order masters to enter this place, this was its home field, and it could display its full strength. As Luyi and Nian Yuxian ran together, the number of insect race guards chasing after them increased. There were also newly hatched insect race guards joining the chase on both sides, and there were even more that appeared in front of them to intercept them. Even though Luyi and Nian Yuxian were both strong, they were still in a dangerous situation, and the scene was very lively. It was not only the insect race guards that were gathering towards him, but also the 9th Order cultivators. After such a long battle, the cultivators also discovered a problem, and that was that the number of insect race guards that the insect queen could hatch was limited. At the very most, there were no more than 800. Before Lu Yi came in, each of them had to deal with several insect race guards at the same time. While they were killing, new insect race guards would quickly hatch, and there was no end to it. So, although they could protect themselves, it was very difficult for them to help others. The situation had been like this for a long time. But since Lu Yi came in, the stalemate had changed, and the number of insect race guards that the Ninth Order cultivators had to face had decreased. This was because most of the newly hatched insect race guards had joined in the pursuit of Lu Yi. All of them had cultivated for many years, so they were naturally aware of this change. Longbow shouted, "Boy, what did you do before? Why is the insect queen taking care of you like this?" This was also what made the others curious. The insect queen was so focused on Lu Yi, as if she wanted to kill him as soon as possible. This undoubtedly showed that Lu Yi was a huge threat to her, otherwise, the insect queen would not have responded in such a way. This was very inconceivable. One had to know that the insect queen did not even care about Ninth Order cultivators, treating them all the same. So why would a Fourth Order be treated so differently? But this seemed to be a matter of course. After all, Lu Yi was a person who had been blessed by the heavens and could do things that ordinary people could not. Everyone quickly realized one thing. If they wanted to break this stalemate, they might have to rely on Lu Yi. This was also the reason why so many Ninth Order cultivators had gathered around him. Picking the soft persimmon to pinch? Lu Yi replied casually. Longbow curled his lips, obviously not believing it. But this was not the time to explore Lu Yi's secrets. He shouted, "No matter what methods you have, hurry up and use them. If you're late, everyone will die." Lu Yi no longer hesitated and threw himself down, shouting, "I ask all the seniors to protect me." Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The sound of air being torn apart rang out as the streaks of light swiftly changed directions, surrounding Lu Yi like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon as they descended towards the ground. Stepping on the elastic meat wall, Lu Yi immediately urged the power of his talent tree and sent invisible roots into the meat wall, causing his heart to skip a beat. The insect queen could control the meat wall, and in the corridor before, Lu Yi had no way to easily touch it. So if the insect queen controlled the meat wall to avoid him now, he would be helpless. At that time, Lu Yi would have no choice but to lead this group of Ninth Order cultivators back to the passage they had come from. However, to Lu Yi's delight, as he exerted the power of his talent tree, the meat wall under his feet showed no signs of disappearing. Instead, the talent tree's devouring ability was rapidly absorbing a huge amount of pure vitality. Lu Yi didn't know why the insect queen didn't control the meat wall to avoid him. But there had to be a reason. Perhaps it was related to the insect race guards. If his previous guess was correct, these insect race guards, who could rapidly hatch, needed the special environment of this place to maintain their combat strength, so they couldn't leave. This place was the core of the entire insect race hive, and was completely surrounded by the meat wall. If a hole appeared in the meat wall, it would inevitably break something and affect the strength of the insect race guards. Once the insect race guards lost their function, the insect queen would only die faster. The attacks of more than 200 Ninth Order cultivators were no joke, and no matter how abnormal its restorative ability was, it would eventually run out of vitality. So, even if it knew that Lu Yi had the ability to devour its vitality, the insect queen didn't control the meat wall to avoid Lu Yi's method. Choosing the lesser of two evils, the insect queen's sentience wasn't low. Or perhaps it was because the meat wall here was easy for even the insect queen to control. Lu Yi didn't bother to investigate the reason, and the situation was developing in his favor. Following his actions, the insect queen suddenly let out a sharp and ear-piercing howl. And on both sides of its body, more than a dozen long and thin claws waved about madly. This howl obviously contained an extremely large amount of pure spiritual energy, and it swept out in all directions. In an instant, many cultivators around Lu Yi let out muffled groans, and some of their faces turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. Luya's divine sea was even more turbulent. Around the insect queen, there were more than a dozen people fighting it, constantly causing damage and consuming its vitality. At this moment, they were also caught off guard and were forced to temporarily retreat. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 1123. The attacks of the insect race guards were obviously much more violent, as they swarmed over from all directions. But they were all blocked by the various Ninth Order cultivators. Beheading. Every time an insectoid guard died, a new one would be hatched. In the midst of the rapidly accelerating battle sequence, the attacks were endless and never-ending. In just a short while, many people were injured. The situation suddenly became a little bad. Originally, although most of these Ninth Order cultivators were fighting individually, they were flexible and flexible. If they could win, they would fight, and if they couldn't, they would run. So it wasn't too difficult for them to deal with the different numbers of insect race guards. The pressure they had to bear basically came from the insect queen's soul attacks. But now the situation was different. Lu Yi was about to use the means that even the insect queen was afraid of, so they had to protect Lu Ye's safety. It was equivalent to changing from a mobile battle to a positional battle. It just so happened that the insect race guards were all unafraid of death, and this inevitably put pressure on the Ninth Order masters. Fortunately, all of them were old cultivators, and could quickly form a thorough cooperation, but it was obvious that this state could not be maintained for long. Lu Yi was keenly aware of this, and hurriedly took out something from his storage space. He raised his hand and shook it, causing it to immediately shatter. A large fog spread out with the surge of spirit energy, shrouding the many Ninth Order cultivators around him. Someone took a deep breath, and immediately became spirited. Because of the repeated attacks from the insect queen, his soul was exhausted and his face was glowing. Soul cleansing water. They were all knowledgeable people. Soon, some of them realized what the mist that was being sucked into their lungs was. It was formed from soul cleansing water. Good boy, you're willing to take out such a treasure. Today, even if I have to risk my life, I'll make sure you don't die. Longbow shouted, and his attacks suddenly became fierce. Not only him, but the other Ninth Order cultivators also became fiercer and fiercer. The exhaustion of one's soul would also have an impact on the display of one's strength. The soul-cleansing water that turned into fog was undoubtedly the best time to replenish one's strength. They were secretly shocked. The bottle of soul-cleansing water that Lu Yi took out just now contained at least a few dozen drops. This was a priceless treasure, but Lu Yi used it without the slightest hesitation or heartache. This move alone made many cultivators of the Myriad Demon's Ridge have a good impression of Lu Yi, and they worked even harder to protect his safety. With the protection of the many Ninth Order masters around him, Lu Yi focused on pushing the power of his talent tree. Numerous roots pierced into the flesh wall, madly devouring the enormous vitality within. The insect queen's reaction became more and more frantic, obviously feeling threatened. It tried to rush over several times, but was stopped by the dozen or so Ninth Order masters who had joined forces to block it, causing it to constantly hiss and use its soul attacks. But even it couldn't maintain such a divine soul attack for a long time. After failing several times, it could only resist stubbornly. The scales of victory seemed to be tilting toward the human cultivators. But everyone knew that the true battle of life and death had only just begun. What was certain now was that Lu Ye's methods had made the insect queen feel greatly threatened. Even so, no one had figured out what kind of mysterious methods he had used. He seemed to be just standing there. If this situation could be maintained, the human race would definitely win. But the key question was, how long could the human race last? The consumption of his soul had been replenished by Lu Ye's actions, but the consumption of his spiritual energy and physical strength could not be easily made up. In such a fierce battle, even the Ninth Order masters couldn't conserve their strength, because they were constantly facing a large number of insect race guards, who were charging at them, without regard for the consequences. During the rest of the battle, the cultivators quickly swallowed spirit pills to replenish their spiritual energy, but it was still a drop in the bucket. If Lu Yi couldn't drain the Insect Queen's foundation before the insect race guards broke through their line of defense, an extremely tragic fate would await everyone. Lu Yi was also keenly aware of this point. I have to think of a way to at least give the Ninth Order Masters a chance to breathe. At this moment, Longbow suddenly frowned and turned to look at Lu Yi. Boy, be careful. Why do you look like you're about to explode? Don't force yourself. It couldn't be helped, as Lu Yi's vitality was fluctuating wildly at this moment, becoming extremely unstable. This was something that couldn't be helped. The talent tree had absorbed too much of the Insect Queen's vitality, and although the talent tree had burned and tempered it into Lu Yi's own foundation, it had also increased the intensity of his vitality. It made him seem like a balloon filled with air. Lu Yi was the key to breaking the current situation, so Longbow couldn't help but worry about his situation. At this moment he could see some of the truth. Although he didn't know what kind of mysterious method Lu Yi had used, it clearly had the effect of stealing the enemy's vitality. Otherwise, Lu Yi, a fourth-order cultivator, wouldn't have been able to inflate his vitality to such an extent. Then explode. Lu Yi responded casually, exploding as soon as he said so. A thick blood mist suddenly filled the surface of his body, as if blood was gushing out of his body. In the blink of an eye, this blood mist spread out and turned into a flowing river of blood. The group of Ninth Order Masters felt their hearts go cold. They had finally seen a glimmer of hope, but the source of it had suddenly exploded. What could they do now? But soon, everyone realized that Lu Yi hadn't died, and that the blood mist condensed into a river of blood was just the result of some kind of secret technique. At this moment, everyone was wrapped in this river of blood and couldn't even see their fingers in front of them. All they could see was a blood-red color flowing around them, and the surrounding air felt extremely viscous. Even their divine senses seemed to be blocked. This secret technique, it's so mysterious. Lu Yi, are you all right? Someone was worried and called out. I'm fine. Seniors can rest assured and kill the enemy. Lu Yi's voice came from all directions of the blood river, and for a time, no one was able to determine his true location, causing them to marvel at the strangeness of this secret technique. The blood race's blood river technique was an offensive and defensive secret technique that had been refined to the grand accomplishment stage of the blood gathering technique. Inside this blood river, Lu Yi had an absolute home advantage. His original intention was to use the blood river technique to create an environment suitable for fighting while relieving the pressure on his own vitality. But after using the blood river technique, he discovered an unexpected benefit. It was much easier to display the power of his talent tree. Originally, when he urged the power of his talent tree, he could only absorb the vitality in the area where he stood. But after the blood river technique spread out, the roots of his talent tree could extend to any location covered by the blood river. This meant that the range of the talent tree's absorption had become wider, and the change was not small. If the previous absorption was like a small stream that flowed endlessly, then the current absorption was like a surging river that flowed endlessly. The Insect Queen was keenly aware of the changes here. After all, the vitality it was absorbing came from her. Before, Lu Yi was just a mosquito, so although he had suffered some losses, it would have taken a lot of time for him to cause any fundamental damage to her. But now things were different. The mosquito Lu Yi had cut a big wound on her body, causing blood to flow out. It was also from this moment on that the Insect Queen showed signs of panic for the first time. The dozen or so Ninth Order Masters who were fighting with her quickly noticed this change, and their attacks became even more violent. On the other hand, the mini-bug tribe guards also became more aggressive after receiving the Insect Queen's order. But at this moment, they were all in the middle of the blood river, so it was difficult for them to find the enemy. On the other hand, the Ninth Order Masters were on the ground. Under the secret guidance of Lu Yi, they could find their next target, launch an attack, kill with a single strike, and immediately flee to find the next target. When Lu Yi activated the blood river technique, it was obvious that the blood river guards were fighting for their eyes, which were also affected internally. However, Lu Yi was their eyes, which was why he was the blood river guard's eyes. their divine senses. On the battlefield, Lu Yi was in charge of everything. Before, when the Ninth Order masters killed the insect race guards, they had to find a way to destroy the corpses, because if the corpses of the insect race guards fell on the meat wall, they would be quickly wrapped up and absorbed by the meat wall, which was not conducive to the cultivator's original intention of consuming the insect queen's vitality. Only by completely destroying the corpses of the dead insect race guards could the insect queen's incubation energy be consumed. Cultivators with fire attribute spirit chi could do this most easily, as they could burn the corpses with fire. Other cultivators with fire attribute spirit chi didn't have such a convenient method. They generally put the corpses of the insect race guards into their storage bags. But in the fierce battle, they often didn't have the opportunity to do so, and could only let the corpses fall on the meat wall. At this moment, there was no need to go through so much trouble, because the dead insect race guards would quickly melt away when they fell into the blood river. As early as when his talent tree completed the first transformation, Lu Yi found that he could strengthen himself by absorbing the energy of cultivators. But this method was tantamount to eating people, which Lu Yi couldn't accept psychologically. What's more, he basically used the golden spirit tag to cultivate, so he didn't need to absorb the spirit chi of cultivators at all. But he didn't expect that he couldn't avoid this in the end. He wouldn't go so far as to eat people, but he could still reluctantly accept eating insects. In fact, some insect race corpses tasted quite good, especially in the current food shortage in the 9 continents. Many cultivators would take the edible parts of the insect race corpses after killing them. When Lu Yi was guarding Shocking Waves Lake Pass, he had done this kind of thing with the soldiers. On the battlefield, the insect queen's hissing became more and more urgent. She had already felt that things were not going well, and only now did she realize how wrong her decision to lead Lu Yi to this battlefield was. Her original intention was to use the insect race guards to deal with Lu Yi. There was no problem with her starting point, because she couldn't stop Lu Ye's invasion. But she seriously underestimated Lu Ye's strength, and failed to kill him in the first place. This led to all the subsequent events. But in the end, Lu Ye's fourth order cultivation was too deceptive. Even the human race cultivators of the 9 continents would suffer losses if they didn't know Lu Ye's strength, let alone a mere insect race cultivator. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 1124. As time passed, the volume of the blood river continued to expand. The constant infusion of vitality was the source of all these changes. Originally, Lu Yi had simply stimulated the power of his talent tree, and the vitality absorbed could quickly be transformed into his own foundation. But after the blood river spread out, the rate of absorption suddenly increased, and even the talent tree was unable to convert this huge amount of energy in time. The excessive vitality had nowhere to go, so it was all accumulated in the blood river, allowing it to grow and surge. As the volume of the blood river grew, the area it covered became wider, and the speed at which it absorbed vitality became faster. Under this cycle, it had already formed a virtuous cycle. Even as the creator of the blood river, Lu Yi was shocked by the amount of vitality accumulated in the blood river. But now that things had gotten to this point, he could only continue down this path. There was no turning back. Right now, the most important thing to deal with was the insect queen. Only by dealing with it could the encirclement of the insect race be completed, and the future be discussed. The cultivators of the 9 states finally had a chance to catch their breath. Thanks to the battlefield environment created by Lu Yi, they no longer had to deal with the insect race guards all the time. Under the frenzied attacks of the insect race, and under the comprehensive supervision of Lu Yi, everyone could adjust to a certain degree at the right time. Although this time was very short, and they would soon have to rejoin the battle, it was still much better than before. As a result, the ability of the 9th Order to fight continuously was greatly enhanced. Outside the blood river, the insect queen was wailing and raging. At this time, it had some premonitions, but the situation had developed to this point, and it was powerless to reverse the situation. So all its anger was useless barking. One day later, The huge blood river filled 10% of the underground space, like a long blood-red dragon that was wriggling about. 2 days later, the proportion of the blood river that filled the underground space had reached 30%, and the blood-red dragon had begun to swell. Now the blood river looked more like a blood lake. 3 days later, the blood river occupied most of the underground space. The insect queen was retreating. This was clearly its home ground. But the funny thing was that as the blood river continued to expand, it kept retreating. This was because it knew that once it fell into the blood river, it would not have a good ending. By the 4th day, less than 20% of the underground space had not been filled by the blood river. The continuous expansion of the blood river gave the cultivators of the 9 states more space to move about, making the situation safer. It could be said that as long as Lu Yi wanted to, he could hide anyone in a place where all the insect race guards could not find them, making it easier for the cultivators of the 9 states to recuperate. It was at this time that the insect queen suddenly waved its claws and charged straight into the blood river. It knew that it could not delay any longer. Sooner or later, its territory would be flooded by the blood river, and it would not be too late. It wanted to rush into the blood river and stake everything on a single throw. As long as it could find Lu Ye's whereabouts in the blood river and kill him, it could regain the initiative in this battle. Although the dozen or so 9th Order cultivators who had been fighting with the insect queen tried their best to stop it, how could they stop it? The insect queen was not afraid of being injured at all, and its massive vitality allowed it to quickly recover from its injuries. With such a reckless charge, it soon crashed into the blood river. The dozen or so cultivators followed closely behind, but when they rushed into the blood river, there was no trace of the insect queen. All they could see was blood, and even the spread of their divine senses was severely hindered. Fortunately, they soon received a message from Lu Yi, and the dozen or so cultivators calmed down and sat down cross-legged to restore themselves. After several days of continuous fighting, they were all physically and mentally exhausted. Even if the insect queen did not rush into the blood river, they would not be able to hold on much longer. Inside the blood river, under the guidance of Lu Yi, a group of cultivators surrounded the insect queen. Now that the enemy had entered the trap, the only thing left was to close the door and beat the dog. Everyone's heart was pounding. A difficult battle, after Lu Yi joined, had taken a turn for the better. At this moment, everyone could see that if it were not for Lu Yi's sudden appearance, they would have been completely wiped out. They had underestimated the insect queen's heritage in the beginning, thinking that they could rely on their own methods to consume the insect queen's vitality and secure victory. But now it seemed that even if they fought to the death, they would not be able to do anything to the insect queen. If they died here, they would probably become nutrients for the insectoid queen, just like the dead insectoid guards. This was the most difficult thing to accept. And if they died, it would be a great blow to the entire cultivation world of the 9 provinces. The blood-red color finally filled the entire underground space. And at this moment, the skill tree's absorption of vitality had reached a comprehensive level, constantly injecting a huge amount of vitality into it. During the days of fierce fighting in the underground space, the Divine Sea Realm cultivators outside were also trying to come up with a solution. Some of them had followed Lu Yi into the underground passage to support the 9th Order cultivators, but not long after entering the passage, they were forced to retreat due to the growth of the flesh wall. So although they were anxious and worried about the direction of the battle below, no one dared to rush in before they found a way to solve the problem of the flesh wall. There were many Divine Sea Realm cultivators who had died tragically due to the growth of the flesh wall. The situation changed on the 5th day, after Lu Yi entered the underground space. The Divine Sea Realm cultivators outside found that the flesh wall that filled the passage was rapidly shrinking. No one knew why this change was happening, but it gave them some hope. When the situation was anxious, the deepest despair would be if nothing changed. As long as there was a change, it was good. In the beginning, the rate at which the flesh wall was shrinking and disappearing was not fast. However, as time passed, the rate at which the flesh wall was shrinking and disappearing became faster and faster. A large number of Divine Sea Realm cultivators rushed into the depths of the underground passage. In the end, they were blocked by a thick layer of flesh wall. They could clearly feel that on the other side of the flesh wall was the battlefield, where the Ninth Order cultivators were, because there were very chaotic spirit chi fluctuations coming from it. What shocked them even more was that there seemed to be an existence with an incredible vitality inside. Just sensing it was enough to make them shudder. They took it for granted that the existence with the enormous vitality was a match for the Ninth Order cultivators. But they didn't know that it was the huge blood river that filled the entire underground space. The cultivators who were engaged in the final battle with the insect race naturally didn't know about the changes in the flesh wall outside. If they knew, they would be able to infer that the insect queen was an arrow at the end of its flight. Its vitality was so severely consumed that it could no longer maintain the existence of the flesh wall. It could only keep the flesh wall wrapped around the final battlefield. What an ironic situation. Its huge vitality was originally its biggest reliance, but now, it had become the enemy's means to turn the tables. In the fierce battle, the Ninth Order cultivators noticed some other changes. The number of insect race guards had obviously decreased. Originally, no matter how many they killed, there would be a steady stream of new guards, which forced them to immediately join another battle after finishing one battle. Even if they could rest for a while under the cover of the Blood River, it wouldn't be for long. But now, the rest time was getting longer and longer, and the number of insect race guards they killed was decreasing. A voice sounded in the Blood River. Lu Yi, what's the situation now? The cultivator who spoke was from an unknown continent. Then Louis gave an explanation. The insect queen is about to die. Seniors, please work harder. The Ninth Order cultivators who were fighting sensed it. So how could Lu Yi, who was monitoring the entire battlefield, not notice it? Because of the massive loss of vitality, the insect queen could no longer breed enough insect race guards. Even its own injuries were not recovering as quickly as before. Previously, it had healed all of its injuries in an instant, but now, it needed more and more time to do so. Previously, it had healed all of its injuries in an instant, but now, it needed more and more time to do so. A burst of laughter sounded from somewhere in the Blood River. This is the best news this old master has heard in his life. After several days of fierce battle, they had gone from being hopeless to being on the verge of success. Even if they were a group of Ninth Order cultivators, they couldn't help but feel happy. It wasn't easy. At their level of cultivation, it could be said that there was no one in the 9 provinces who could match them. However, with so many of them working together, they still had to rely on a young man in his early 20s to use a mysterious secret technique to coordinate and coordinate. It took them a few days to wear down the insect queen to this extent. It really wasn't easy. In that case, let's finish it in one fell swoop. Someone shouted. It really wasn't easy for the insect queen to reach this point. In that case, let's finish it in one fell swoop. Someone shouted. Lu Ye's voice sounded again. Seniors, please wait for half an hour, and try to recover as much as possible. Since we've already reached this point, there's no need to rush. At such a young age, you're quite reliable. We'll do as you say, someone responded. Across the Blood River, figures stood or sat, taking out spirit pills and swallowing them to restore themselves as much as possible. But there were also some who were busy. After all, the insect queen still needed someone to restrain it. Although the number of insect race guards had been greatly reduced, they had not completely disappeared and still needed to be dealt with. However, under Lu Ye's command, almost everyone was given a certain amount of time to rest. Half an hour passed in a flash and the final battle began. More than 200 Ninth Order cultivators, except for a few dozen who were responsible for dealing with the newly hatched insect race guards, came to the insect queen's location under Lu Ye's guidance. The anger they had been suppressing for several days finally erupted at this moment. The scene of so many Ninth Order masters attacking together was spectacular, dazzling to the eyes. Countless secret techniques were displayed. Spirit chi fluctuated, spear waves, saber waves, and sword images wreaked havoc. stirring up the blood-red river into a turbulent torrent. In just an instant, the insect queen's body became tattered, and half of its claws were broken. It hissed and struggled, but to no avail. Its flesh and blood squirmed as it repaired itself with the help of its remaining vitality, but the speed at which it recovered was no longer as fast as before. How could it compare to the speed at which these ninth-order cultivators were inflicting damage on it? Everyone hurry up and try. Since the start of the final battle, the insect queen's body had never been intact again. 82 Chinese Network. Chapter 1125. At this point in the battle, Lu Yi basically had nothing to do. Even if he withdrew, with the number of ninth-order cultivators present, he could still kill the insect queen. But he did not stay idle. The insect queen's severed limbs contained an extremely large amount of vitality, and if he left it alone, it would inevitably be absorbed by the flesh walls and transformed into vitality that would be injected into the insect queen's body. So, Lu Yi controlled the flow of the blood river to wrap around the severed limbs and inserted the roots of his talent tree into them, absorbing and devouring them. As a result, the insect queen's vitality was being drained more and more seriously. As the battle continued, the insect queen's originally bloated body began to slim down, and the speed of its recovery became slower and slower, until a certain moment, when countless attacks bombarded it from all directions, the insect queen's body was torn apart, and the undercurrent of the blood river swept the pieces of its body in different directions. Under the crazy urging of the talent tree, the remaining vitality of the severed body was absorbed and injected into the blood river. But the insect queen was still not dead, and on its remaining head, two scarlet eyes flashed with hatred and cruelty. A fierce will swept out in all directions, and a sharp voice rang out in almost everyone's mind. Hateful humans, there will be one last one, price. The voice gradually disappeared, and along with it, the insect queen's eyes dimmed. In the blood river, many figures stood. The battle had been going on for a long time, and the boiling spirit chi in their bodies could not be calmed down for the time being. What made it even more difficult to calm down was their state of mind at this moment. No one had expected that the insect queen could actually communicate. Although everyone knew that it had high sentience before, it did not have high sentience. High sentience did not mean that it was a true sentient being. Fa, who had only viciously cursed before his death, obviously knew that with the situation developing to this point, there was no way to communicate. It was meaningless. No one had experienced such a battle before, and the insect queen's tenacious vitality had almost wiped them all out. We'll have to ask Lu Yi about this, someone said. Lu Yi's voice sounded. The insect queen has fallen. Seniors, we have won this battle. Gasps could be heard, but there were no cheers. All of them were ninth-order cultivators, and they had already foreseen the outcome of the battle, so they naturally wouldn't reveal their emotions like the younger generation. On the contrary, the other Divine Sea Realm cultivators, who had made it here with great difficulty, couldn't help but cheer after hearing this conversation. We won, we won. Previously, they had followed the tunnel all the way here, but they had been blocked by a thick wall of flesh, unable to advance. The insect queen had died, and the wall of flesh was blocking them. The blood ball filled the entire battlefield. Even though it looked like Eerie was some kind of ghost, he didn't dare to rashly enter. He also didn't know what kind of ghost this blood ball was. Lucy, heaven-shaking cheers rang out, and the joy of victory was continuously transmitted to the rear of the formation, which was then transmitted outwards through messages. The cultivators of the 9 regions, who were still waiting outside the insect nest, were completely stirred up. Not long after, the entire 9 prefectures began to boil. The insect plague that had lasted for several years was finally resolved today. This was a day that was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. It was unknown how long such jubilation would last before it subsided. Deep underground, the Divine Sea Realm cultivators who had gone to provide support began to evacuate in an orderly manner. The Ninth Order cultivators also prepared to withdraw from this battlefield. Although the battle had ended, there were still many follow-up matters that needed to be dealt with, which required their presence. The sect master was keenly aware of some abnormalities. Did your secret technique lose control? Logically speaking, since the insect queen had died, Lu Ye's blood river technique should have been dispersed or withdrawn. However, the thick blood color still filled the entire battlefield, which made the sect master somewhat uneasy. Everyone frowned when they heard this. There was no doubt that Lu Yi was the biggest contributor in this battle. Not to mention Grand Heaven Alliance. Even Myriad Demon Ridge didn't want to see anything bad happen at this time. They didn't notice it before, mainly because they were still immersed in the victory of the battle. After the sect master mentioned it, they quickly realized that something was wrong. Losing control of one's secret technique could be a big or small problem, but the scale of Lu Ye's secret technique was too big. If it really went out of control, it wouldn't end well. The battle was won, but the biggest contributor didn't end well. If this spread out, it would be bad for the reputation. There's a small problem, but it's not a big problem, Lu Yi replied. It was indeed not a big problem. The main problem was that too much vitality had accumulated in the blood river, causing him to be unable to withdraw the blood river into his body for a while. Of course, directly giving up was also an option, but if he did so, the loss would be great. Lu Yi wanted to refine all the vitality in the blood river. This huge amount of vitality was rare to him. If he really refined it, his physique would also be greatly improved. Moreover, the Blood Clan's blood techniques mostly used vitality as the foundation. If he accumulated more vitality in his body, it would be more convenient for him to use blood techniques in the future. He was doing this at the moment, but it would take some time. Is there anything we can help with? Longbow and Lu Yi were more or less familiar with each other. He thought highly of this young man, so he represented the Wan Mo Ridge to express his stance. This was the right attitude to treat a contributor. They couldn't just say that the battle was over and the alliance between the two camps had collapsed, so they had to directly attack the biggest contributor. Everyone was a person who cared about their reputation, so they really couldn't do such a thing. If there's anything we can help with, just say the word. Thank you for your kindness, City Lord Long, but no one else can help with this. I still need to work hard, Lu Yi said as he controlled the blood river to wrap around Hupu and send him to the headmaster. Hupu also knew that it wasn't a good time to stay, so he obediently landed on the headmaster's shoulder. Longbow nodded and didn't say anything else. He also knew that even if Lu Yi really needed help, he wouldn't let the people of the Wan Mo Ridge interfere. At this time, he would only ask the Haotian Alliance for help. But now, it seemed that outsiders really couldn't interfere in this situation. Seniors, please go. This battle has been won, and the billions of people in the 9 provinces are waiting for good news from you. There's no need to stay here. He had to refine the vitality in the blood river, so he couldn't be disturbed by others. Longbow nodded and said, "In that case, be careful." Without saying anything else, more than 200 Ninth Order cultivators found the exit under Lu Ye's guidance and quickly left. But there was one person's aura that didn't go far. Lu Yi checked and knew that it was Thought Moon Immortal. She was obviously waiting for him and also staying here just in case. Soon, there were no more auras in the large underground space. Lu Yi immediately urged the power of his talent tree to refine the power in the blood river. The blood races In Chi said that only those saint seeds that had advanced could compete with him. 1. Everyone had to understand, even the ordinary blood race's attainments in blood arts. They were inferior to him. Only some saint seeds that had also obtained saint blood could compete with him. The information in the inheritance stated that if one could cultivate blood arts to the extreme, they would be an immortal existence. Even if it was just a drop of blood, the Moonbee reflection would be reborn. Rebirth through blood was too much of a fantasy, but after Shi Hong's battle, he suddenly realized that it might be true. Even if one couldn't rebirth from a drop of blood, it wouldn't be far from it. One could instantly recover from any kind of injury. With the Star Foundation seed, one could instantly recover from injuries. Even the most elite team of 200 people couldn't do anything about it. This kind of ability could instantly recover from injuries. The ability of Shi was the rebirth of one's flesh. One more step, and it would be rebirth in the true sense. Of course, this might be a unique ability of the insect race, and had nothing to do with the blood race. But since the blood race's inheritance had such records, it couldn't be made out of nothing. Lu Yi felt that if he had free time in the future, he would have to study the blood race's inheritance. He didn't dare to think about rebirth from a drop of blood, nor did he hope for instant recovery. At the very least, if he was injured in the future, he could recover faster with the blood race's secret technique. There was one more thing that Lu Yi was puzzled about. That was the insect queen. What realm was it? Although it was a divine sea realm cultivator, its divine sense was stronger than all the ninth order cultivators present. Under its soul attack, more than 200 people had suffered a big loss. Moreover, its divine sense gave off a feeling that it was above the divine sea realm. It was very likely that its level was not at the divine sea realm, but beyond. Otherwise, even with the help of many insect race guards, it would be impossible for it to have such great ability to defeat more than 200 ninth order cultivators by itself. Even eldest senior brother Feng Wujiang didn't have such ability. If the insect queen was really at the divine sea realm, it couldn't be stronger than eldest senior brother. But if it wasn't at the divine sea realm, then what realm was it? Lu Yi hadn't thought about this before, but now that he had reached the divine sea realm, and according to his cultivation efficiency, it wouldn't be long before he reached the ninth order divine sea realm. What was his future path then? He had to consider some things in advance. In the 9 provinces, many ninth order divine sea realm cultivators would begin to comprehend the mysteries of the divine sea after reaching their limit. But after so many years, no one had made any breakthroughs. The divine sea realm seemed to be the limit. But those cultivators who had reached the end of the divine sea realm could clearly feel that there was still a path ahead, but they couldn't enter it. For cultivators who pursued higher cultivation and greater strength all their lives, this feeling was extremely torturous and uncomfortable. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.